The Dragon's Promise by Elizabeth Lim. Chapter 31. I woke to the wail of the night sky breaking. Thunder rattled the clouds, and lightning soon followed. We were riding on the wings of a gathering storm. The winds grew violent and chased us over the Tsuian Ocean. Shielding myself from the rain, I rose to my knees and peeked over the rim of the basket. Led by Kiki, 20 birds flew alongside my brothers, unfazed by the storm. "Where are we?" I asked. Kiki didn't glance back. "Not far from the Tambi Isles." "So quickly?" "The winds are helping." Only good thing I can say about this storm. I rested my elbow on the rim of the basket and clutched one of the silk ropes as I gazed down. Dark clouds obscured my view, but if I stared through the gaps, I could make out the hundreds of islets dappling the stormlit sea. Raikama's homeland. A lump rose to my throat, and I swallowed it down, focusing on the distant horizon. We'd have to land before sunrise, or my brothers would lose their wings while still flying over the water. The rain was growing stronger, and wind pounded the basket, twanging the ropes as if they were zither strings. My stomach dipped, and I ducked down again, reaching for Takan. His head lay by my feet, eyes pinched shut. Bander's amulet weighed on his chest, heavy as a grindstone, dark and ominous. I wanted to free him of the burden, but I didn't dare touch it. Another lashing of thunder cracked the sky, but Takan's breath barely hitched. I had a feeling whatever he faced in his sleep was far worse. Gently, I brushed the rain from his cheeks. His skin was cold, and I rubbed his hands in mine, trying to warm them. The last time I had tended to him like this, I'd hardly known him. In fact, I'd resented his very existence. I had stitched up his wounds with all the care I'd show a pair of old trousers. From the looks of it, he still bore the scars. Heat rose to my cheeks. Thank the strands, my brothers were too busy flying to notice me staring through the rips in Takan's tunic at his muscles and smooth skin. I'd never hear the end of it. "I should have known it was you," Takan murmured, his eyelids blearily peeling open. "What?" I scooted closer worriedly. "What did you say?" "All those uneven stitches you made on me." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "Same as in the apology tapestry you sent." "That should have been my hint that it was you, Shirori." I couldn't help my reflexes. I punched his shoulder, probably harder than I should have. "Did that hurt?" I asked, feeling immediately awful. "Are you?" My gaze went down to the amulet on his chest. "Hurt?" Takan choked back a laugh. "No, I deserved that." His eyes were open now, but they lacked their usual spirit. "You should take my weapons," he said hoarsely. "I won't let Bander hurt you, even if he takes my body, but it's better to be safe, just in case." I bit down on my cheek and gave a nod. I saw only the carved birch bough he'd carried when we'd first met. Painted on the widest part of its grip was Takan's family crest, a rabbit on a mountain, surrounded by 5 plum blossoms and a full white moon. I picked it up. "Anything else?" The dagger on my belt. 2 knives in my boot. "No sword." "Didn't bring it." I gave him a narrow look. "What sentinel doesn't bring his sword?" "The one you foolishly bound yourself to." A small smile touched his mouth. "I'm a better archer than swordsman, anyway." It would have been extra weight. Fair enough. I stashed the dagger in my sash, then found the knives. I was starting to put them away when the amulet's chain began to twist around Taken's neck. "He's waking," he rasped. "Shirori, get away from me." Taken covered the amulet with his hands, trying to hold Bander inside. All color drained from his face. His eyes flickered, earthy brown one moment, then red as demon fire the next. Taken. I reached for his arm, trying to help. A mistake. Taken's gaze was bloodshot, and he grabbed my wrist with a wolf-like snarl. "You should listen to your betrothed, Shiorianma." I hooked my elbow and sent it flying into his chin, but Bander was too fast. He shoved me back, laughing gleefully as I fell against the side of the basket. "Shirori!" Taken's eyes flickered back to brown, and he grabbed the Demon King's amulet, trying once more to tackle him. But Bander had already won. Wisps of smoke unfurled from Taken's fingers, and his entire body shuddered, all strength leaving him until he crumpled to his knees. Then the smoke flooded out of the amulet, coiling and steaming until it settled into the shape of a wolf. I plucked Taken's bow from the ground, fumbling with one of the blue-feathered arrows. "He's stronger than he looks, your betrothed," Bander said, prowling along the basket to stalk me. "But every mortal has his weakness. You are his." The bowstring chafed against my knuckles, and I gritted my teeth. "You know your arrows do nothing against smoke, don't you?" I knocked the arrow and raised the bow. "Watch me. Here, I'll stay still for you." Bander sat and wagged his tail like a puppy. Even in his most nebulous form, he found a way to mock me. With a laugh, Bander dissolved into a shapeless haze. "Clever of the witch to bind you to the pearl," he said. "But if she thought that would buy you more time from me, she was mistaken. Look, see what you've done to it." I didn't need to look. The pearl was more broken than ever, like two halves of a moon connected by the slenderest bridge. "Will you reach Lapser before it shatters?" Bander asked. He blew a puff of air, loosening the streak of white from behind my ear. "It wears on you, your highness. I would gladly take its weight off your hands." "And free yourself of your oath?" I spat. "I'd rather die." "Fortune smiles upon you, then, for that is a rather crucial part of the plan." The amulet trembled upon Taken's chest, and Bander began to speak, whispering words of dark magic I could not understand. I crawled to Taken's side and shook him. "Wake up! Wake up, Taken. You need to return Bander to his amulet." While I tried to rouse him, the birds Kiki had recruited to help fly the basket let out blood-curdling screeches. All this time, they had flown in harmony, but something had changed. They splintered off in droves, as if spooked. "What's going on?" I yelled to Kiki. "Why are they leave?" My question trailed into a scream. Caught in a tumultuous wind, the basket jolted, throwing me against Taken as we plunged below the clouds. The ropes jerked down, twisting and making the basket spin. I fumbled for something to hold on to while my brothers desperately tried to regain control. Even without the other birds, they should have been able to steady us. But something was pulling us down. I could feel it, and my brothers could see it. They were just as agitated as Kiki's birds, only they didn't abandon me. They veered sharply, thrashing their wings. The basket shuddered, and Bander flashed a menacing smile. "Prepare yourself, Your Highness. They're coming." Who was they? I couldn't even see what was happening. "Kiki," I shouted. "What's going on?" "Demons," she cried. From below, dread coiled in the pit of my stomach. The demons of Tambu arose as one teeming mass, the glow of their red eyes illuminating foxes, bats, tigers, and snakes. Their faces were garish, like the masks children wore to scare evil spirits away during the new year. They sounded like children too, squealing and laughing as they brigade my brothers. Their tails curled around the ropes, and their wings batted excitedly against the underside of the basket. When their claws began to slash and tear, my heart tightened with fear. Curled strips of bamboo flew off, a painted turtle eye and silken fox tail peeling into the sea of clouds, never to be seen again. I swiped at the demons with my dagger. "Go away," I shouted. Get. Get." They snickered. The dagger was useless. My magic was too. Every time I launched an attack, more demons appeared. A winged tiger swatted a paw at Benkai's feathers, and a bat nipped its sharp teeth into Kiki's wings until my paper bird fled in terror. Others still were more interested in the basket, prowling up its sides and stripping it of parts. Feeling cornered, I turned once more to the pearl. It was humming a low song, the way it tended to in the presence of danger. As I drew it out of my satchel, its power fanned out beyond my control, ensnaring the demons in plumes of bright white light. Their shrieks were like knives against glass, loud and shrill. Wings thrashed and tails whipped, claws and talons flailing as the demons struggled to be free of the harsh pearlescent light. I twisted around, watching the demons drop back into their teeming swarm and retreat to the islands below. I expelled a sigh of relief. A premature sigh of relief, unfortunately. I'd forgotten about Bander. He leapt into the basket, fur spiked and blood-red eyes piercing. This time he didn't wait. He pounced, and I braced myself. The attack never came. Takken had stirred, and he held the amulet to the sky. It was nearly dawn, and the last threads of moonlight sieved through the clouds, touching upon the amulet. "Return!" Takken shouted. "Return, Bander." At the command, Bander's body began to writhe and contort, as if yanked by invisible strings toward the amulet. The demons spun angrily to confront Takken. "You think you have the strength to best me?" Takken didn't reply, but he rose, standing face to face with Bander. A silent war broke out between them, the demon pushing and striving against Takken's control. Sweat beaded Takken's temples. He took a step back and clenched his jaw, his eyes going white as he strained against the demon. At last, Bander jerked away. "I will have your soul for this," he swore. In one last effort, his claw struck out and caught Hasho by the wing, ripping through feather and bone. Then, with a hiss, Bander vanished back into the amulet. The basket careened, the rope slipping first from Hasho's beak, then from my other brothers. Down, down, we plummeted into Tambu, the origin of demons and the birthplace of my stepmother, the nameless queen. Chapter 32. A leafy canopy broke our fall. Takan and I tumbled out of the basket in opposite directions, crashing through a web of outstretched branches to the jungle floor. Thud. Insects skittered, leaves crunched, and branches snapped. Light shimmered in waves, glistening like hot oil, and sweat trickled from my pores. With what strength I had, I scrambled onto my forearms, my elbows sinking into the warm, moist earth. Then I went still, remembering belatedly to scan for demons. Nothing. When I was sure it was safe, I pushed up to my feet, sweeping away the fronds that brushed against my waist. Takan, I called out. Kiki? The rain had ended, and sunlight yawned through the canopy, a sight that spurred me into motion. It was past dawn, so my brothers should be men again. But where were they? Their transformations weren't exactly peaceful and quiet. Surely I would have heard their cries. A flash of red silk penetrated the fog, and I scrambled toward it. There, not far from the basket, lay Takan. Kiki and my brothers, too, but they were still cranes. Leaves and dirt clung to Takan's skin. He was breathing, but unconscious. My heart pounding, I quickly inspected him. There were new tears in his tunic, exposing a tanned shoulder and more of the scars I'd left on his chest. But he was unharmed, thank Amirian. I propped him against a tree and dotted away the beads of sweat on his nose with my fingers. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Hasho, he mumbled, his eyes starting to peel open. His wing. Not understanding, I twisted to face my brothers. There were only 5 of them, all squawking sounds I couldn't understand. Panic seized me. Where's Hasho? As soon as I asked, the fog lifted and I saw. My youngest brother lay curled, his entire body tucked against himself. His throat hummed painfully, and his belly shook with every breath. I crouched beside him, taking in the wings furled tightly at his side. His left wing was smoldering, its feathers charred. Hasho, I choked. It was Bander, said Takan, the tenor of his voice gone low. I couldn't stop him in time. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say. My attention was fixed on the stripes of watery light caressing Hasho's black wing, a sinking realization that he hadn't changed back to a man. None of my brothers had. And Hai thinks the enchantment is different this time, said Kiki. They won't change back and forth. I breathed in, my mind reeling. That is good, I told myself. In his state, Hasho couldn't endure a transformation. We need to find help for Hasho. There has to be a village on this island. I'll look, offered Kiki, jumping to get a view from above. A beat later, she was fluttering back to us, crying snakes. Snakes. Out of the trees, the rocks, even the bushes, snakes beset us. The fattest ones hung off long tree branches, their mottled scales melding in with the lush jungle cape. The sight reminded me of how Raikama's garden used to be. That was the only reason I wasn't afraid. They look hungry, Kiki said nervously. They're staring at me. Maybe my paper is tasty to these Tambun serpents. I am becoming more like a real bird every day, you know. You're still far from being a real bird, Kiki, I replied. Besides, cranes eat snakes, not the other way around. Then ask your brothers to eat them. No one's eating anyone. Have you tried talking to them? I've been trying. My paper bird lifted a fearful wing. Wait, someone's coming. The snakes parted, making way for the largest serpent I had ever seen. Her scales blended into the palm leaves crinkling under her body, but as she slid out of the foliage, they transformed, changing first to match the umber dirt, then fading to parchment white, the same shade as Raikama's snake face. Only the great snake's eyes didn't change. They were like slivered diamonds against a liquid yellow moon. Mesmerizing. She rose, standing high as my waist. A forked tongue darted out, and she gave a long hiss. Kiki shuddered. What's she saying? I asked. She says her name is Yujil, and she asks if you are the daughter of Lady Greensnake. Lady Greensnake? The lady has been gone for many years, Kiki went on, but Yujil can smell remnants of her magic on you, daughter of Shinari. At the name, a note of grief hummed in my chest. She knew my stepmother? Her father did. Raikama's past was a mystery I longed to unravel, but I bit my tongue, holding back the urge to ask the serpent more. Now wasn't the time. I knelt, leveling my gaze respectfully with Yujil's. My brother is injured. Do you know where we might seek aid? Her scales changed color once more as she slithered back in the direction she'd come. By the time I rose and Tak and picked Hasho up, Yujil had disappeared into the dense undergrowth. I feared I had lost sight of her, but her snakes had waited. They showed us the way, moving as one and with impressive speed, like a billowing cloth rippling over the earth. I kept my eyes on the ground. Thick roots bulged in our path, often hidden under a mantle of leaves and wildflowers. We passed a grove of black bamboo trees and too many waterfalls to count, but everything else was green. Yujil could have led me in circles, and I would never have known. The dawn burned into morning, and the sun turned harsh, stewing and thickening the air. My breathing had become a series of pants, and my clothes weighed on my skin, sticky with perspiration. Kyoto's hottest days were nothing compared to this. I stole a glance at Takan. Usually he would have been at my side, making idle comments about the jungle to help distract me from the heat. Not today. His steps were heavy enough for me to notice, and his skin carried a tinge of gray. His eyes were shadowed by dark half-moons, and his broad shoulders sloped down, as if bearing far more than an injured crane. But his spirits were undampened. When he caught me looking, he sent a cheerful wave. Instead of waving back, I slid my arm through his, walking beside him the rest of the way. We've arrived, Kiki announced when Yujil stopped before a short wooden fence. She wrinkled her beak. This is the shrine. It was a lone building at the end of a dirt road, a wide house made of teak that had seen better days. Moss coated the walls, whose orange paint was faded from years of rain, and the hanging prayer signs were cracked and chipped. I ventured past the wooden fence, following the line of stone statues up to the threshold. "Hello," I said in my best Tombun. "Hello." There was a girl with sun-browned skin sweeping leaves from the courtyard, and she dropped her broom when she saw the snakes behind me. "Uncle," she screamed, disappearing into the shrine. Not long after, a middle-aged man with an orange scarf and straw sandals appeared. He was slight in frame, no taller than me. Deep creases of irritation lined his brow. Perhaps he'd been in the middle of a prayer when interrupted. His hard gaze swept past the snakes to the crane in Takan's arms, then to the 5 others soaring over us protectively. None of this seemed to surprise him in the slightest. I fumbled for the words in Tombun to request help, but I needn't have bothered. The shaman spoke Khitan. They say a storm brings snakes into the home, he said. What trouble do you carry with you, that the serpent queen herself should come to my doorstep? We seek help, I said, gesturing at Hasho. This crane is injured. The serpent queen brought you here for the life of a bird? Curious indeed. The shaman gathered his fraying sleeves and folded his arms. He didn't look curious at all. Come inside. As he turned on his heel for the shrine, Yujil and her snakes retreated toward the jungle. Wait, I called, chasing after the serpent queen. Her skin had changed again, this time to match the gray stones of the road. When she stopped, I bowed and said, breathlessly, will I see you again? She rasped in reply. She says the jungles are rife with demons, conveyed Kiki. Do not venture into them with him. Kiki cocked her head at Takan. Especially not at night. That wasn't what I'd asked, but the serpent queen had already slithered away, vanishing into the shrubs beside the road. So it wasn't Hasho that had made the snakes uneasy. It was Takan. You, the shaman said, pointing at Takan as we re-entered the shrine. Wait outside. With great care, Takan passed Hasho to me. My brother's feathers brushed against my elbows as I wrapped him in my arms. He was so light and fragile, almost like a child. The room was small, furnished with a low table and an incense pot for repelling mosquitoes. Silently, I laid Hasho on a straw mat for the shaman to examine. The demon that marked him, the shaman began woodenly, as if he were speaking of a winter melon and not a living, breathing bird. What was its name? Bander. The shaman frowned. That is not one I recognize. He is newly made, I replied. In Kiata. The edges of his eyes constricted, and I could tell what he was thinking, that there were no demons in Kiata. That Kiata had repressed its magic for centuries, until even our gods were silent. He let go of Hasho's wing and wrapped his fingers around my brother's long neck. It is best to let such things be, unfortunate as they are. A demon's mark is difficult to undo. He will be reborn into a better life. No, I exclaimed, realizing in horror what the shaman was going to do. I lunged to block him. No, please. He's my brother. If I had uttered such words to anyone in Kiata, they would probably have thought me mad. But the shaman didn't even flinch. Calmly, he let Hasho go. You should have said so earlier. The crane's enchantment is not the demon's doing. No, I said uneasily. It is mine. I see. He was considering. My acolytes will contain the demon's touch to just his wing, but I cannot guarantee that he will recover fully. You will find out only once he is a man again. A pang of worry stabbed my chest. Will he live? Yes. The shaman glanced at Takan, whose long silhouette stole along the walls. It is this one I am more concerned about. He may not stay at the temple. His presence will attract demons. It has already, I gather. How did you know? I asked. The shaman offered hasho water from a jug. I speculated. Demons are drawn to those who bear their mark. You seem to know much about them. Tambu is the birthplace of demons. They are a part of our lives. That idea was so foreign to me, I needed a moment to let the words sink in. I believed it, though. Magic here wasn't buried, as it was in Kyoto. It was woven into the very fabric of Tambur. I could feel in the air, in the trees, even in the small lizards that scampered up the walls, the potential for wonder, for chaos, for miracles. Like most Kiotans, I'd never been abroad. I'd never been to a place where gods and demons and mortals live side by side. That was unfathomable in my homeland. Yet here it felt like the most natural thing. You don't fear demons? I said. I fear humans more than demons, the shaman replied. There are many kinds of demons, but the majority are simple-minded. Most in Tambur stick to the forests, though 1 or 2 a year will cause mischief in the village. Last month there was one who wouldn't leave the local well, kept making the water salty. I tilted my head. Such mischief was far different from the experiences I'd had with demons. We teach the children to treat them like wasps, continued the shaman. So long as we do not bother them or arouse their attention, they keep to themselves. He straightened the pleats of his sash, his tone so bland he might as well have been talking about the laundry. Rare is the demon with the cunning and power to cause great harm. But this Bander, he was an enchanter, I whispered. Before he turned. As I thought, he replied, demons are drawn to power, weak ones to strong ones. It is their nature to bring ruin and chaos, but they tend to follow by example. So when an enchanter turns demon, the combination of his human greed, his enchanter magic, and his demon hunger brings many into his thrall, as you witnessed when you arrived. The shaman's eyes were on Takan, and I understood what he was thinking. Takan isn't a I know he is marked, the shaman interrupted, and I know what he bears in that amulet. There is a place not far that will be safe for him. I will take you there while my acolytes tend to your brother. I swallowed, uneasy about leaving Hasho alone. Your brothers will watch him, Kiki said. Don't worry, they'll make sure nothing happens. The shaman was still waiting for my answer. Thank you. I faltered, not knowing what to call him. Ashley is enough, he said. There is no need for honorifics. Without another word, Ashley led me behind the temple and down a winding dirt road. The houses we encountered on the way were in ruins, their tiled roofs blanched by the sun and their gardens left to rot. They looked long abandoned. Is this the main road? I asked. It was once, replied the shaman. People only come down to Puntalo village on their way to visit the shrine. The area is believed to be cursed. Cursed? He did not smile. It is superstition. I have lived here all my life, and I am well enough. He ushered us into the last lot on the road. In here, the demons will not come to this place. It was a small plot of land, deserted years ago, with weeds thriving in the cracks of the stone path. 3 wooden huts stood in the open yard, overridden by cobwebs and moss. A kitchen, a bedroom, and a storeroom, I guessed. Village houses in southern Kyoto had similar layouts. A flicker of movement drew my eyes to the largest hut. Inside, A muslin curtain undulated in the warm wind, and through the broken windows I could make out a wobbly stool. There was no one else here, yet I could hear someone singing faintly, the lilting melody of a song I'd known since childhood. "Why do demons not come here?" I asked. "Whose home is this?" Ashley must not have heard my questions, for he didn't reply. "This tree is descended from a sacred grove," he was saying. "Every house on the street once bore such a tree, but only this one still lives. When dusk falls, you must tie your companion to the tree and light the braziers." "Tie him?" "To the tree," I repeated, appalled by the instruction. "I thought demons wouldn't come to this house." "They won't come in," replied Ashley with an edge to his tone. "But the one inside him may come out." "Is there any way to subdue Bander?" Takken asked evenly. Takken's calm rivaled the shaman's, and only I winced. "Demons are immortal. Only magic can kill them." Ashley paused. "But we humans are not without defenses." He circled the tree, his gaze never leaving Takken. "I'll return with incense and rope before sundown. Do as I bid you, and Tambu's demons should let you alone." I cannot speak for the one within him. Sensing that his presence wasn't entirely welcome, Takken lingered by the tree. "I'll wait here while you acquaint Shirori with the house." Before I could protest, he backed into the courtyard, leaving me alone with the dour-faced shaman. "Thanks a lot, Takken," I grumbled in my thoughts. Ashley entered the hut on our right. "You may stay in the kitchen tonight," he said. "There's a bed on the other side of the curtain, and some food left in the pantry for nourishment. Not much, but it should sustain you until I return." I thought no one lived here anymore. "I come sometimes to pay my respects." The slightest flicker in his brow perturbed his calm. "Who lived here?" I asked again. A beat of hesitation. "The owner left many years ago for the capital," he replied. "Only I come, sometimes, to bring offerings to the tree." That explained the food in the pantry. Offerings to the tree? He wouldn't look at me. "For the two sisters who once resided here." The hairs on the back of my neck rose. What happened to them? They were both lost to Tambu, but in very different ways. My eyes flew up to meet the shaman's. Two sisters. This was their house, wasn't it? Vanna and Shinari's. Shinari. Every time I said the name, my heart gave a twinge. Shinari was the name of my stepmother's true self, a secret she had kept from everyone, even my father. "This was their house," I repeated. "You knew them." I'd finally broken the shaman's composure, and he pursed his lips tightly. "Everyone knew them. The beauty and the snake." There was no malice in his reply, but I still flinched. "Were you friends?" Shinari had no friends. A pause. "But I knew Vanna. What was she like?" I said. The hard lines bracketing Ashley's mouth softened, giving me a glimpse of the boy he'd once been. She was kind and generous and gentle. She had the power to make anyone adore her. Even her stern Ada could never say no to her. The girls in the village used to fight over who could brush her hair, and the boys vied simply to touch it. "Softer than waterbird feathers," I murmured, remembering Raikuma's hair. Yes! I regarded him, and the wistfulness on his face shuddered a beat too late. "Were you in love with her?" I asked, surprised by my own brazenness. To his credit, he did not falter. We all were. Everyone worshipped her. They used to think the mysterious light in her chest was a gift from the gods. She was born with it, you know. When she laughed, it would emanate through her clothes like the sun. The golden one, they used to call her. Ashley's face became a mask. My father was the shaman then, and he asked me to keep her from unwanted attention until she was married. That was how we became close. She trusted me. A breath. But after Shinari died, she changed. She stopped speaking to her friends, even me. His hands fell to his sides, and I wondered at the stories he was leaving untold. What changed? I asked. The light within her shone differently. Her spirit became stronger. No one else noticed, but I knew Vanna. For all her radiance, she'd never been as strong as her sister. People thought me mad, but I've always wondered whether it was truly Vanna that her father buried in the jungle. Ashley's expression turned hard once more. Today, when the Serpent Queen brought you here, I at last had my answer. I whispered, my stepmother's true name is a secret I promise to keep. I will keep it as well, said Ashley solemnly. There are few that remember Vanna as well as I do. Or Shinari. He'd said himself that he'd been Vanna's friend, but not Shinari's. Why did he remember them both when others did not? Months ago, the nameless queen's ashes arrived at my shrine, said Ashley, bringing up Raikama's name as if he'd read my thoughts. You sent them, didn't you? I nodded. I thought so. I considered taking them to the king of Tambu to be buried in his palace, but now that I know it is Shinari's spirit within, I will bury her by this sacred tree in the jungle. It is not far from where Yujul and the other serpents dwell. She would have liked to be with the snakes, I agreed. I should like to join you if there's time. Tomorrow, then, said Ashley. It is no coincidence that you landed in Sundow. The strongest spirits live even after death, and I suspect Shinari's brought you here. Why? Who knows? To find answers? To protect you? Only time will tell. He stood by the threshold. Fate watches you closely, Shiorianma, as it did her. It never favored her. Do not assume that it favors you. His words were grave. I meant to ponder them with the weight they deserved, but the moment the gate swung open and Ashley left the compound, my stomach let out a loud, fat growl. I glanced outside, spying Takken asleep under the tree and Kiki buzzing about the huts. My hand came to rest over my stomach. How long had it been since I'd eaten? Hunger rolled inside me in a torrential wave, and it was a good thing Ashley had mentioned food in the pantry. Fruit flies and gnats buzzed over a bowl of rotting coconut flesh, but inside the cupboard, I found a stalk of sugar cane, a jar of peanuts, and 2 raw cassavas. A tincture of pandan juice and ground sesame too. Spices that would have cost a fortune in Kyoto, but were commonplace here. I spent a few more minutes raiding the pantry, then I set everything I'd found on the table next to the stove. I knew just what to make. Shinari was a girl who lived by the sea, I sang, who kept the fire with a spoon and pot. Stir, stir, a soup for lovely skin. Simmer, simmer, a stew for thick black hair. But what did she make for a happy smile? Cakes, cakes, with sweet beans and sugar cane. When I finally looked up, holding my bowl of batter, Takken was outside the window, arms folded over the sill, with Kiki on his shoulder, listening intently. I nearly dropped my batter, but Takken reached through the window to grab the rim of the bowl, steadying me at the same time. Then he inhaled deeply, taking in the smell of the coconut and peanuts pervading the kitchen. "How long have you been standing here?" I demanded. Standing? I was guarding the bowl with my life. A good thing, too. It warmed me to hear humor in his voice, even if it was only a shadow of his usual mirth. I slumped my shoulders. "I thought you were sleeping." "I was, until I heard you singing." "I didn't mean to stop you." "You should keep at it," Kiki quipped. "That song of yours scared away all the birds. And all the demons too, I'd bet." I glared at my bird, glad for once that Takken couldn't hear her. "It's just a silly song. Something Rikama used to hum." "I probably have all the notes wrong." "There are no wrong notes when you're happy," Takken replied earnestly. "You sound happier than you have in days." I like it here," I admitted. "It's almost like she's still here with me." A rush of grief sprang to my chest, and I focused intensely on stirring my batter. Takken touched my hand. "Will you teach it to me when we go home?" "The song?" He nodded, and I suddenly wanted to hug him and cry in his arms at the same time. I turned to wipe my nose on my sleeve. "Lunch will be ready in an hour. Can you wait?" "Of course." He picked up the 2 empty buckets tipped against the walls. "That's just enough time to search for a well. You're going out in this heat?" "I don't mind." His voice was light, but it carried an edge, one that made me notice the distance between us. The fact that he hung back from me, that he still hadn't come inside the kitchen. What I wouldn't give to chase those shadows out of his eyes. It would do Takken good to occupy himself with an errand, I decided, if only to keep his mind off Bander. "Very well," I said. "But take Kiki with you. And if there's any sign of Bander, come tell me immediately," I instructed my bird. She gave a sharp nod. "Oh, don't worry. You'll hear my shrieks from across the village." Chapter 33. By afternoon, the island's heat had swelled past the point of unbearable, and I felt like the biggest idiot in Tambu for deciding to steam cakes over an open fire. Even the gnats had fled the kitchen in favor of a cooler haunt. This was how Ashley found me, fanning myself in the corner, watching my batter cook. He set down his bag with a displeased thump. "You're alone." Takken went in search of a well. "You said he only had to stay by the tree after sundown. Dusk is hours away." Seeing Ashley frown, I quickly changed the subject. "How is my brother?" "The crane is convalescing and should be able to fly again by tomorrow. However, the other 5 squawk endlessly, and their feathers have molted all across the shrine." His frown deepened. "It is quite a chore for my niece to clean." "I'm sorry. Save your apologies," said the shaman curtly. "She hardly minds. She's taken to the birds as a way to shirk her prayers." A harumph. "You will be leaving tomorrow anyway, I gather. Sundown is no one's ultimate destination. It hasn't been since the Golden One's selection." Again with that name, the Golden One. I knew it referred to Vanna, but hearing the title made me flinch. "In Kyoto, we called her Your Radiance." I paused, not sure where I was going with this. "How did you learn Kyotan?" The king asked me to. When the golden one left for Jindara, he thought she might send for me. She never did. Ashley began unpacking the items he'd brought: a sheaf of incense, rope, a short sack of rice, 2 sugar apples, eggs, and half a carp. He sniffed. "What are you baking?" "Cakes," I replied. "Would you like to try?" "They're almost ready." Ashley lifted the steamer's lid, peering inside at the rising little lumps. He took one cake and chewed. "It's tougher than I remembered." Tomboon cakes are meant to be soft and sticky. Another bite. "But I suppose the flavor is there vaguely." "You've had them before?" I asked. Vanna used to bring cakes like these. She would cut them into the shapes of flowers and decorate them with rose petals. I set aside a plate for Takan, then sat with Ashley at the table. All afternoon, my mind had buzzed with questions about Rikama. "Will you tell me about Shinari?" "What is there to tell?" "We weren't friends." Ashley's reply was brusque, a clear signal to talk about something else. But I'd never been known for my tactfulness. I pushed. "Anything. Please." He set down the cake. His face had turned hard, and I didn't think he'd actually speak. The other children and I used to throw turtle eggs at her when she walked down the road. We called her a monster, a snake demon, a witch. Many other names that were far more cruel. The shaman closed his eyes. His words were heavy, and I could hear that the past had long been a terrible weight on his conscience. Her Ada forced her to wear a mask wherever she went, even at home. I could hear him beating her when she disobeyed. He was the only person she ever feared, I think. He worked her hard, giving her chores to keep her out of sight. She had the face of a snake, you see. Her eyes alone would make grown men cower. She was cursed, I said. She was a sorceress, said Ashley. Rumor had it that she could make you change your thoughts with a flicker of her eyes and could call the snakes to do her bidding. They weren't rumors. My brothers and I had witnessed the hypnotic thrall of Rikama's magic many a time. We used to say Shinari ensorcelled Vanna to love her. Vanna was the only one who was kind to her, the only one who mourned her when she died. Though now I suppose it was the other way around. How did she die? I asked. How did you think she died? There was an attack, answered Ashley. A demon came for her in the middle of the selection ceremony. Only Vanna witnessed it. She said Shinari tried to protect her and, in doing so, was killed. My chest constricted at the lie. Rikama had told me the truth just before she died, that the demon had killed Vanna, not Shinari. And while Shinari mourned, the pearl in her sister's heart rooted itself to her, fulfilling her wish to be beautiful in the most awful way. It gave her Vanna's face. When she emerged from mourning, she had changed. Ashley looked away, his shoulders pinching. She was colder, her light muted like the moon's. Some worried that she'd gone mad. She cut herself, you see, straight across the face. Revelation dawned, and a tingle shuddered down my spine. The mysterious scar across my stepmother's face, why she had borne it so visibly, had been a source of gossip in the palace for many years. Even I had wondered where it had come from. Now I knew. I hated seeing my sister's face in the mirror. Rikama had told me before she died. She had intentionally given the scar to herself, as a reminder of her life as Shinari. Her Otto was furious about it. Ashley went on, but it did little to deter the suitors. They vied for her hand, going on impossible trials for her, obtaining things like mosquito hearts and gold from the bottom of the sea. That weeded most of them out. In the end, she chose the most unlikely of the men. My father, I said. He wasn't even a suitor. But she left with him one evening, so quietly and swiftly that no one noticed until they were long gone. We thought all the kings and princes would wage war against Kyoto, but it was as though a haze had fallen upon the suitors. They all forgot about her. Everyone forgot about her. Except you, I said. My memory is not untouched. But yes, as I said before, I remember more than most. After all these years, Raikuma's magic held strong. Still, there was a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. The demon that attacked Vanna, do you remember anything about him? Ashley shook his head. Only that Shinari fought him with a spear. He began to rise. It broke during their battle, but I've kept it. Do you wish to see? Of course I did. I followed him outside to the tree in the courtyard. Leaning against the trunk was a long spear, its wood dark with age. Ashley picked up the weapon and held it upright. It was as tall as I was, but its end had been split off. She slew a tiger with it once, Ashley said. It came into the village and slaughtered the 4 men who tried to fight it, and the rest of us ran away. Shinari stayed. Not for us, but for Vanna. I doubt she would have cared if the tiger had devoured us. With both hands, Ashley carefully passed me the weapon. That was the first time I glimpsed the true Shinari, whom even tigers feared, and not the girl who sat on a broken stool peeling taro root all day in her mask. She was exceptionally strong and bold and loyal. That was the woman who became your stepmother. I was quiet before I spoke. Thank you. Ashley gave a slow nod. For a moment I thought he might speak again, for his lips were parted. But before I could query what had been on his mind, he turned for the road and took his leave. I wasn't alone for long. Soon enough, Kiki returned, and I spied Taken's silhouette not far down the road. The paper bird landed on my shoulder, and I let her poke into my thoughts, catching up with what she'd missed while away. I said nothing and rolled the spear in my hands, tracing its grooves and edges. Even broken, it was heavy. I could hardly heave it past my shoulders without straining. That Raikuma had wielded it against a tiger was a testament to her strength, and a reminder of how twice she had lifted me off my feet, as if I weighed little more than a doll. I had thought that coming to Raikuma's birthplace would give me answers about her past. Instead, I had more questions than ever. Blood stained the broken end of the spear. It was dried, blackened by time. I could not tell whether the blood was my stepmother's or someone else's. I dipped into my satchel for the mirror of truth. Show me whose blood is on the spear. Seconds passed, and the glass only misted over with humidity. Kiki wrinkled her beak. Some magic mirror. I hope Aling is getting more use out of it than you. I shrugged. Lady Nama told me it would show only what it wants me to see. Perhaps the past is better kept in the past. Is it? I never took you for a sage, Shirori. My face crinkled into a small, tired smile. Not that I don't have suspicions. You think the blood is the wraiths. I did, and I finally lowered the spear. Takken had returned, carrying 2 buckets of water. That looks like it's impaled a demon or two, he said, gesturing at the spear. It was Raikuma's, I replied. Ashley says she wielded it to fight the demon that killed her sister. Before he could ask more, I steered him into the kitchen. I saved you cakes. Eat them before they spoil. Takken picked one up from the plate. These are Shinari's cakes. From the song. I nodded, impressed that he remembered. Of all the islands and all the villages in Tambu, we came to hers, I murmured. And here I am, baking her cakes in her childhood home. Your strand of fate is tied more closely to hers than anyone's. Even yours? I teased. Takken parted his lips, but no reply came. Dusk was fast approaching, and the shadows grew bold. They crept out of the cracks in the walls, draping a film of darkness over the house. When they touched Takken's eyes, his gaze blackened, like a light extinguished. He set down the cake and took a step back, resuming his distance from me. You should get the ropes. I didn't waste a beat. I grabbed the ropes and incense Ashley had left. Together, we tied him to the tree in the courtyard. I couldn't help but think of the threads we'd tied around our wrists just days before, about how those knots had been made with love and laughter, while this one, which I tightened against Takken's chest, was made with fear. Were he in my place, he'd find some story to tell to ease my mind and distract me from my ordeal. Stories about monkeys with magical hair, carp that granted wishes, and brushes that painted objects into life, as in the letters he'd written me. Yet I was useless. My throat had constricted in worry. All I could say was, I'll prepare a fire to light the braziers. He didn't even eat, remarked Kiki as I returned to the kitchen. I swallowed hard, picking up his untouched cakes. Let him be. I was looking for something to strike a fire with and accidentally yanked aside the muslin cloth hanging against the wall. Behind the curtain was a broken stool, the very one Ashley had mentioned. I leaned my stepmother's spear against the wall, giving my shoulders a break from its weight. Don't look so dour, Kiki said, trying to cheer me up. With Takken tied up to that tree, you'll get the bed all to yourself. There's only one in this whole house, and I didn't know why I flushed. That isn't it, I said curtly. Is it the blood, then? Kiki was in a gossipy mood, which was nothing unusual. She landed on the spear, pecking at its warped grooves as I searched the room. I could have sworn I'd seen a stash of flint somewhere. You really think Vanna was killed by too late? I felt a stab of panic. Kiki, don't say his na, Crommelin? Too late. The name had been uttered, and I shot up to my feet, adrenaline rushing to my head. I clamped down on Kiki's beak and glanced outside, heart speeding in my chest. The sun was nearly sunk, and Takken's back was to me. What's the matter with you, Shirori? Kiki trilled. Takken can't hear me anyway. It is not Takken I'm worried about. A tuft of smoke had puffed up from the candle by the window. Except that candle had never been lit. A terrible certainty welled within me. From the window, I saw smoke drift up from the amulet around Takken's neck. It slipped between the knots that held Takken fast, then seeped into his mouth and nostrils. Get the spear, he shouted. Now, Shirori. With a gasp, I lunged for Rikama's weapon. I'd made it to the door when Takken appeared, ropes still dangling from his waist, eyes flickering uncontrollably from brown to red. He blocked me, a smirk distorting his features. I swung, but Takken evaded the spear easily and caught the shaft in one hand. His eyes blazed red as wolfberries as he pushed me against the wall. You know, I've always wanted to meet the Wraith. Bander's voice stabbed into my thoughts. And now I know his true name, thanks to you. He rammed the spear against my shoulder, and a firework of pain exploded in my collarbone. Kiki launched herself at the demon, but I caught her by the wing and hurled her out of the window. She had no chance against Vander. Not that I did either. I couldn't even look away as the wolf misted into being, his horrid visage superimposed over Takken's. Clever of you, seeking to pit the Wraith against me. But you make a mistake, Shiorian-ma. You imagine he'll be like me, open to reason and conversation. You? Open to reason and conversation. I scoffed. My hands were on the spear, but little by little, I was stepping toward the kitchen, trying to reach the unwashed bowls I'd left on the table. Don't make me laugh. He is called the Wraith for a reason. There is a dark side to his nature, and his time on Lapser has surely eroded whatever good there once was. He will be demon to the core, only with a dragon's strength. You'll see soon enough. Yes, I said through my teeth I will. Letting go of Rikama's spear, I smashed a bowl over Takken's head. The room went silent as he slumped to the ground, unconscious. Vander was gone, at least for now. I didn't have a breath to waste. With my heart pounding, I dragged Takken back to the tree. His whole body clenched as I retied the ropes, wincing to see the knots dig into his skin. Just when I thought to loosen the ties, a snarl escaped his lips. I didn't know if that was Takken subconsciously helping me or if he was actually fighting off Vander. But I gritted my teeth and tied them tighter. Then I lit incense around the tree and started fires in each brazier. By the time I was finished, it was nightfall. I was exhausted, and I collapsed onto Rikama's broken stool. I leaned my head against the wall, trying not to worry about Takken and instead imagine my stepmother's former life. At my side, the mirror of truth lay beneath a damp pile of sweat-ridden clothes. I wonder if she used to sit here, I murmured aloud to it, and just stare out the window. Not much of a view. I bet it helped her sleep. As I spoke, Yujil slid into the hut, crawling noiselessly to my side. She's telling you to sleep, said Kiki. You'll need your rest for the battles to come. Her kind will watch Takken tonight. I'm not tired. The Serpent Queen's words were not a request. Her Yoki eyes glowed like Rikama's, and a lull fell over me, forcing me to obey her wishes. If only I'd asked Saria how to break the sleep spell. Dragons and snakes really are cousins, I mumbled before I slumped over the broken stool, my head tipping against the wall. As I nodded off, I was dimly aware of Yujil and her snakes surrounding the tree, layering themselves in a protective circle around Takken. What I didn't notice at all was the mirror of truth glimmering under my arm. In my dreams, I hadn't been born yet, and this house hadn't been abandoned. It belonged to a family of 2 sisters. The first was a girl a little older than me, tanned and sinewy, her limbs as muscular as a seasoned sentinel's. Her hair was in a long and messy braid, but when she turned, I saw her face covered by a thin wooden mask. Shinari. The broken stool was broken even then, and it wobbled as she sat. Her hands worked deftly, peeling a taro root, but her thoughts roamed far away, as far as she could get from her Ada's kitchen, from the four walls that surrounded her like a cage. What she wouldn't give to run free of this place forever and disappear into the forests. What she wouldn't give to live among the trees and wild beasts. Only there did she feel safe. Only there did she forget that she was a monster. She reached for the next taro root to peel. "It's such a shame, isn't it?" her sister was saying, oblivious to Channy's thoughts. "You know Ada's going to pick the richest one, but all the rich ones are so ugly. And old. Did you have someone else in mind?" Her sister flushed, but she said, far too quickly, "Of course not." Shinari said nothing. Secretly, she was sure her sister had a lover. The other day, she'd found a note in Vanna's pocket. "You are the light that makes my lantern shine," it read, but she didn't see the point in bringing it up. You think all the gold in the world could buy beauty and health, but it can't. No. Shinari's jaw ticked. Nothing would smooth away the scales of her face into flesh. She'd tried. She'd tried to cut off the thick splotches along her cheeks, chewing on a chunk of wood to keep from screaming and ignoring the scorching flashes of pain as her steady hand nicked next at the rough grooves between ears and neck. But overnight, her skin grew back the same. Only the pain remained, seared deep within her. Nothing would make her beautiful. Not all the gold in the world. "No," she said again. "I would know." "I'm sorry, Channy," Vanna pleaded. "I didn't mean it like that." "You know I didn't." The words crawled out of Shinari's throat. "I know." Vanna wrapped her arms around Shinari's shoulders and pressed their cheeks together, the way she used to do when they were little. Her cheek was always too warm and Shinari's always too cold. Together, she'd say, they were just right. Her sister lifted her cheek and squeezed Shinari's hand. "When I become a princess or a queen, I'll get you the best creams and paints money can buy." Vanna meant well, but the words stung all the same. This time Shinari could not force a smile. "What about my snake eyes?" Vanna giggled, not hearing the bitterness creeping in her voice. "You can use them to mesmerize our enemies." "If I had that power, I'd just make everyone forget I was there," Shinari replied softly. Vanna didn't hear. Someone was calling for her outside. Shinari exhaled, relieved when Vanna slipped out. Sometimes she couldn't tolerate her sister's blithe optimism. Sometimes she wondered whether it would be easier if Vanna thought her a monster. It would hurt less for both of them. Shinari crept off her broken stool, accidentally catching a glimpse of herself in the washpot. Taro pieces floated in the water, hiding her eyes and her nose. A breeze pushed them apart, and she shuddered. To see the monster in her reflection instead of the girl she should have been, one with black braids, copper eyes, a soft nose, and full lips. She thought that pain would have eased over the years, but it hadn't. It had only dulled and become a part of her, stitched deep into her soul. In her dark, secret heart, what she yearned for, even more than for her face to go away, was for someone to love her. For someone to look her in the eyes and make her feel beautiful, even if she was not. For someone to take away the loneliness etched in her heart so she could laugh without tasting the bitterness on her tongue once the sound faded. She wanted to be the light that made someone's lantern shine. But that would never happen. Not for her. She hit the water with her fists until her reflection was no more. Chapter 34. Come morning, the fires around the tree had gone out, the incense sticks were burned to charred nubs, and the snakes that had arrived to safeguard Takken were gone. The heavy rain that had come in the night had dwindled to a drizzle, and as I walked into the yard, Takken barely stirred. Even in his sleep, he grimaced, clutching Bander's amulet in one hand as if he were trying to shatter it in his fist. In the 2 days he'd carried the amulet, it had already extracted a toll. He was noticeably thinner, new hollows appearing in his cheeks when he wasn't forcing a smile. His eyes, too, became duller and more sunken by the hour, especially past dark. Takken let out a faint wheeze as I pulled him toward the hut. Once we'd taken shelter, I brushed aside his hair and wiped his skin dry. That was when I saw the scorch marks along his sleeve. "What happened?" I whispered. A low hiss drew my attention to the window where Yujil lounged against the warped shutters. "The demon was stronger than I anticipated," she said as Kiki translated. "But my kin were born to battle his kind." "Thank you." I hesitated. Yujil sounded worn. "Was anyone hurt?" "Your gratitude is not necessary, nor is your concern. We see it as an honor to fight for Shinari's daughter and guard her betrothed." My head was dipped in respect, but I lifted it now, surprised. "How did you know he was my betrothed?" "Snakes are sensitive to magic." "We always have been. And the two of you are bonded." A pause. He fought well. Not many can endure a possession as powerful as Bander's. "Shinari chose him for me," I said before thinking. But it was the truth. The Serpent Queen was quiet for what seemed a long time. "My father said she was a good judge of character," she replied at length. She could see the light in others, whereas they saw only the darkness in her. That was her greatest pain. I had felt a bit of that pain last night in my dreams. My heart still ached from it. Yujil started to slither down the other side of the wall, but I called out to her, "Wait." One last question had been pecking at the back of my mind. Ashley told me that a demon killed her sister. Was it? I halted, knowing better than to say Cromwelin's name aloud. Was he a half-dragon? Yujil dithered, letting out a long hiss before she skated across the weeds and wildflowers and out the gate. I turned to Kiki. What did she say? That their fates were once entwined, then they diverged. Kiki shrugged. Whatever that means. I didn't understand either. I'd have to see if Ashley knew more. Back inside the hut, Takken was stirring. Sunlight poured over his face, chasing away the shadows in his eyes and bringing a trace of color to his cheeks. I dared think it meant he was better. I hovered over him, feeling bad as he rubbed his head. "If you're wondering about why it's sore," I said, "I gave you a big thwack on the skull with a bowl." Takken gave a sheepish look. That would explain it. I offered him some water. I saw the scorch marks. Are you hurt? I'm fine, he assured me. The snakes helped. So did the ropes. I'll tell you about it another day when my ears aren't ringing quite so much. He was trying to sound wry, but there was an undertone of pain that made my heart both heavy and light all at once, and I bumbled for something to say. Failing at that, I kissed his cheek. His skin was warm, warmer still when my lips left it. I basked in the astonished look he gave me. What was that for? To make sure you haven't turned into a demon. I pinched his chin playfully. Demons don't blush. A corner of his mouth lifted, and I felt a sense of triumph. Now I know what it was like for him all of last winter, trying to make me smile, I thought. He rocked forward to get up. Are there cakes left? Seems I forgot to eat yesterday, and battling all your demons has burned a hole in my stomach. All my demons. I crossed my arms. You're the one they're attracted to, and you had an army of snakes helping you. I bit down on my lip. You're actually hungry? I could eat. I should eat. Have some, then, I allowed. But have more than cakes. Too many sweets for breakfast will make you slow. And how will you defeat all my demons if you have indigestion? Humor flecked Taken's eyes. Eggs will be good for you, I went on, encouraged. Ashley brought some yesterday, along with fish. I was planning to prepare them for our flight to Lapsir, and I could use some help. That is, if your lordship learned to cook while growing up in Iroh's tundra. All of us sentinels learn the basics. Good. Then you steam some rice and eggs while I make the fish. Kikil chase away the lizards and fruit flies. I rose, passing him the sack of rice and nudging him toward the stove. I'm not letting us face any more demons on empty stomachs. Overnight, my brothers had become Sundao's most popular attraction. When Takan and I arrived at the shrine, half a dozen village children were crowded around the cranes, feeding them berries and rice kernels. Hasho was among my brothers, and he clamored for his share. It buoyed my spirits to see him so animated. If not for his darkened wing, I would have forgotten about Bander's attack. He looks well, remarked Kiki. Fatter than yesterday, too. Maybe I should have stayed in the shrine instead of loafing about in that old haunted hut with you. As I glowered at her, Ashley appeared. I was wondering when you'd show up, the shaman said. A cloth bag hung over his shoulder, and he tucked it to the side. Make haste. The children may delight in your brothers, but I assure you, their parents are already plotting to stew them for dinner. That got me moving and quickly. I whistled for my brothers to follow. It wasn't easy herding 6 overstuffed, excitable cranes into the jungle, but once their breakfasts had digested a bit, their minds seemed to sharpen. The opposite was true with me. The deeper we ventured into the forest, the more my thoughts wandered. I felt clumsy here, tripping over the looping vines and meandering ferns, and my flesh was bait for the mosquitoes. I couldn't have been farther from home, from what I knew and loved. And yet, part of me wasn't ready to leave. One day in Raikama's homeland had only ignited my curiosity about her past. I wanted to stay and learn about the girl she had once been, but the pearl couldn't wait. Neither could Takan. What's on your mind? He asked, walking by my side while my brothers flew ahead. Raikama? I grimaced. Am I that easy to read? Easier than when you had a bowl over your head. You're never going to forget that, are you? Never. That earned a laugh from me, but my amusement was fleeting. I chewed on my lip. I was thinking about how I used to beg her to tell me where she was from. She never spoke of her home, not even once. I didn't even know her name until the end. My voice softened. I dreamt about her last night. To be honest, I can't remember most of it. I swallowed hard, but when I close my eyes, I can still see the island as she did. I don't want to lose that. Then tell me, he said. Let me help you remember. I drew a deep breath, trying to summon Shinari's yearning to escape into the jungle. She had names for everything, even the flowers that cling to the trees like strings of beads and pearls. My voice grew thick as I went on. She knew which barks cured stomachaches, which ferns tasted sweet if you fermented them long enough, and which petals turned bitter when you boiled them. She knew where to find orchids for every color of the sunrise, and how to soften palm fruits to glean their precious oil. She even knew where to find fireflies at night by the low grassy hills beside the jungle, so that if her lantern were to go out, she could still find her way back to her Atta's house. I faltered then, my mouth going dry. This was her home. After all these years, I finally know where she came from. Takin said nothing, but he reached for my hand. I found that was all the comfort I needed. The sacred tree wasn't far from where our basket had landed, but I never would have found it without Ashley. He led us through a narrow ravine overgrown by bamboo and palm trees. There, among a thicket of pale-barked birch and a sprawling field of white moon orchids, was a withered tree, little more than a stump. I blinked. This is the sacred tree? This is all that remains, said Ashley. The tree itself died years ago. Yet you remember. It is my duty to remember what others have forgotten, he said solemnly. But I am simply a vessel. Some memories slip even my tightest grasp. I knew he was referring to Raikama. The shaman gestured at the orchids, and a pair of butterflies fluttered up from their petals. His voice fell soft, almost tender. They were Vanna's favorite flowers. A pause. Shinari's too. The sisters were like the sun and moon, different as day and night, but they both loved orchids. Vanna is buried here, I said. It wasn't a question, and Ashley said nothing as he settled his lantern before Vanna's grave. My brow furrowed, seeing that the lantern was lit though it was still day. Its light shone upon the orchids, steady and unwavering. Then my heart pinched as if struck. The lanterns, the light, they confirmed what I'd suspected all along. He'd loved Vanna. That was why he'd never left Sundow. That was why he had stayed. Let their spirits be together at last, Ashley said to me quietly, giving back a wooden box that I recognized. Inside were Raikama's ashes, as well as the tokens my brothers and I had placed within to accompany her journey to the gods. The red thread I'd tied around it was still there, its color dulled by time and sun. Seeing it, I felt my heart swell with emotion. I had sent the box all the way from Kyoto, certain I would never see it again. Now here I was, halfway across Lorien, in Raikama's birthplace, reuniting her with her sister and her home. Even after death, Raikama's fate and my own were knotted. "You're her daughter," said Ashley, "and a sorceress in your own right." It is time to undo the curse that was set upon the sisters and right the wrongs cast upon their souls. He departed before I could speak with him again, and I sank my knees into the flower beds. My brothers surrounded me, bowing their long necks in turn. "They want to give you a moment alone," Kiki said, sitting on my arm. "We'll finish patching up the basket and torment some local birds until they agree to come with us." I gave a wordless nod. She touched my cheek with her head, then flitted off. When I was alone, I set the box on the earth, among the gently swaying moon orchids. Using Rikama's spear, I dug a small hollow and buried the box inside. I bowed low, pressing my forehead to the earth. When my stepmother lay dying, I hadn't had time to forgive her for all she had done. I had barely understood the sacrifices she had made for my family. Our family. "I wish I could ask for your forgiveness," I whispered to the earth, believing that, somehow, Rikama could hear. "And I wish I could forgive you in return. I wish I knew more than a sliver of your story." The words burned in my throat, and I punished myself by swallowing. "I'll always miss you." The smell of orchids flooded my nose. Raindrops shimmered on the white petals, and I plucked the loveliest blossom and laid it over Rikama's ashes. "May your spirit find peace, stepmother," I said. "Whether you choose to stay here, among your snakes, or find your way to heaven." I bowed once again. Then, as I rose, dusting my sleeves, 7 paper birds rustled out of the flower beds. The very same ones I had enclosed in Rikama's box to accompany her to wherever she took her final rest. They took flight, circling me as I stood. "They're coming with you," spoke Yujil, camouflaged among the orchids. She slithered into view. "What task did Shinari set upon you, that she should watch over you even after death?" Was she truly watching over me? I started to answer, but my jaw fell agape when I realized Kiki wasn't here. No one was translating. How am I understanding you?" "The tongue of snakes is understood by those we regard as kin," Yujil replied. "My father shared with Shinari an unbreakable bond. He was to her what your bird is to you. In a way, we are family. You're her daughter, I am his. But I couldn't trust you until I understood why you carry that accursed gem at your side." Yujil's sulphurous eyes fell on my satchel. "The heart that cursed the Golden One, who cursed Shinari in turn." Yujil was speaking of Cromelin's pearl. "She asked that I return it to its true owner," I replied. "That was her last request." "Its true owner." Yujil let out a long, angry-sounding hiss. "Is that what she called the demon?" "Half demon," I corrected in my head, but I wisely left it unsaid. Yujil's tail snaked around Rikama's spear, her scales turning red and black to match its dried blood. "You asked about the demon she fought." My father warned her not to trust him, but she thought he was her friend. That was her one mistake. She spat her next words. In the end, he betrayed her. I'd already suspected, but now I finally confirmed the truth. "The Wraith," I whispered. "He was the demon that killed Vanna." "Yes, needlessly. Chani had sworn to give the pearl to him when her sister passed naturally. But that agreement was broken when he killed her, so the pearl doomed him to his current fate." Yujil paused. "He won't be happy to see you, Shiori-ma. Far from it. But a promise is a promise, I said softly. Not a kiss in the wind, to be thrown about without care. It is a piece of yourself that is given away and will not return until your pledge is fulfilled. I looked into Yujul's eyes. Shinari still has a part of me. I must return the pearl so I can claim it back, so she may rest. Yujul's anger faded, and she gave a slow nod. Then the 7 paper birds fell, landing lifelessly among the folds of my robe. As I gathered them up, Yujul let go of the spear. It began to sink into the earth, disappearing into the flower beds. She watches you, her daughter, said the serpent as she too blended into the orchids. My father would have been happy to know that she found a family in the end. Long after I'd departed Tambu, her words stayed with me. Remembering them never failed to make me weep. Chapter 35. We left Tambu on a headwind of luck, our basket breezing along in a warm gale over the Tsuayen's emerald waters. I should have known it was too good to last. Look, Takkin murmured, pointing at a blanket of mist unfurling over the water. That must be Lake Pajuan. Where the mist touched the Tsuayen, its emerald waters went dark. As my brothers dove nearer, the air turned cold, as if we'd pierced a hidden veil. Far too early it was twilight, and streaks of black and violet painted my brother's wings before steeping the world entirely in darkness. It was beautiful at first. Not a star blinked, and the moon was lean, like a scythe scraping the clouds. When it grew too dark to see, I took out the pearl. At my touch, it opened a hair, emanating the light of lost stars to guide our way. I wished I could say the rest of the journey was peaceful, and that whatever darkness awaited us I banished with the pearl. But that was not so. Before long, the birds Kiki had recruited began screeching and flailing their wings. Not again! Kiki cried as they abandoned us, winging back the way we had come. Cowards! Come back here. Come back. Without the extra birds to help, the basket teetered against the wind. My brothers bit deeper into the ropes, their necks stooping as they strained to carry us. But it was no use. We dipped lower and lower, and my stomach made a hard swoop as I held in my screams. Help us! I cried, turning my attention to the pearl. Light blinked from its crack, but instead of helping, it spun off into the clouds, leaving me in the dark. Scourge of my existence. I started to hurl a curse after it, but the basket made another drop, and my throat fell to my stomach. Enough with the pearl. I had to help my brothers. I tossed Raikuma's 7 paper birds into the sky. Awaken. One by one, they quivered to life and picked up the basket's ropes with their beaks. Their aid wouldn't keep us from falling, but it'd buy us time. Enough to reach Lapser if we were lucky. We had to be close. The Forgotten Isles sprang up from below, their waters pockmarked with jagged rocks and hanging cliffs. The winds gathered strength, and Lake Pajuan thrashed hungrily. It was under the guise of this gathering storm that the darkness birthed a shadowy behemoth. None of us saw the guardian of Lapser creep upon us, his black wings skulking beneath the clouds, until he smashed our basket. I slammed into Takken as the world shook, wooden debris and shredded silk exploding in every direction. Somehow, while the world around us fell apart, I managed to grab hold of Takken's hand, or maybe he grabbed mine. I couldn't tell. A scream had knotted up my throat, and I bit down on my tongue until my mouth filled with blood. Its iron tang was all I tasted as we fell. In the darkness, I crashed against feathers and beating wings. My brothers! They'd found me, and they threaded their necks between my arms. That was close, Kiki cried, hanging onto Andahai's neck. Close indeed. I caught my breath, glancing back at Wande, Jotun, and Reiji. They'd rescued Taken too, but they were struggling to hold him. At first I thought it was because he was heavier than I was, but then I saw Bander's amulet rattling against his chest, juddering violently as smoke seethed out. Taken's eyes met mine, an unspoken apology on his face. Adrenaline shot like a lightning bolt through me. Taken, don't you dare. I didn't know whether it was Taken or the amulet that made him act, but he flung himself free of my brothers' backs and plunged into the sea. I lurched after him, but the pearl suddenly returned. It slammed into my ribs and yanked viciously, tearing me from my brothers. While Taken disappeared into the depths of Lake Paduan, the pearl spirited me soundlessly away. We soared over the water under the black night to a city so old it was the color of ash. A city sculpted of despair and decay. Lapser. The pearl dropped me on a promontory overlooking the thrashing sea. I turned away from the water, only to find myself face to face with an army of ghosts, all standing silent as tombs. Something told me that they'd been awaiting my arrival. My knees scraped against the ground as I pulled myself up. Behind the ghosts were the ruins of Lapser, cracked walls and battered roofs, roads that came to ragged ends like broken bones, cemeteries of headless trees. Its skyline was low, except for one tower in the center, so violently tall it looked like a sword staked into the island's heart. It was the same tower as in my vision. At the top was where I'd seen Taken die. I ran to the edge of the cliff. Taken! I cried. Kiki. Brothers. Only the pounding waves of the ocean answered. Kiki, Taken, my brothers, they were nowhere to be seen. The wind susurrated against my neck, and I whirled at the sound, trying to hold on to my courage despite the sinking feeling in my gut. More ghosts had gathered on the cliff. Their presence turned the air sour. Strips of dead flesh dangled off their skeletal frames, white hair matted against their spines. Those with eyes greeted me with smoldering glares. Those without stared vacantly ahead through holes gouged in their skulls. They began to soldier forward until I was cornered, steps from the edge of the promontory. I didn't dare fight. I knew what would happen if they touched me. I'd become a ghost like them, trapped here without a soul. For eternity. Crommelin! I shouted, scanning the swarm of hollow faces for the half-demon. Where was he? He'd just tried to kill me over Lake Paduan. He had to be here somewhere. I held the pearl high. This is what you want, isn't it? Come and take it. As my words echoed into the hollow night, the ghosts came to a halt. They craned their necks. At first I thought Crommelin had come. But when I looked up and saw the smear of red light in the sky, a chill came over me. The color was strident, a gash in Lapser's monochromatic landscape, and it was our only warning before the demons descended. They took the form of many different beasts crudely patchworked together. Gray-furred bears with lizard tails and webbed bat wings, tiger heads with snake bellies and shark fins. Some even had distortedly human features. But unlike the demons of Tambu, they were made of shadow and smoke, turning to flesh only when they touched the earth. They were bound to Lapser the way the demons at home were bound to the holy mountains. I dropped to my stomach and scrabbled for my knife. But the demons ignored me and rushed for the ghosts, spearing their throats and clawing at their eyes. High-pitched screams broke the island's silence. This was my chance to escape, but I couldn't look away. The demons and ghosts were at war, ripping at each other's heads and throats. What was happening? I swear, Shiori, it's a miracle your curiosity hasn't gotten you killed. Kiki shot into view with the 7 paper birds trailing. What are you doing, gawping like that? Come with me this way. Following her lead, I raced into the city, instinctively using the tower as my compass. Road after road led to a dead end, and I swore the buildings moved. I set one with sloping clay roofs and arched windows as my target, but try as I might, I couldn't reach it. The city was a labyrinth, one that shifted so I could never find my way. Only the tower never changed. Each time I saw it, I cowered, thinking of the fate it held for Takan. But finally I looked at it head-on. Really looked. At the top there loomed a winged demon, partly submerged in darkness. He was as still as the parade of statues that surrounded the tower's base, only I knew he was no statue. Crommelin, I whispered. Kiki wailed. Just give him his vile heart so we can find the others and get out of here. I was trying. I shouted his name and charged toward the tower, but I couldn't get past the God of Thieves statue guarding the stairs up to the base. Whenever I approached it, whirls of smoke misted out of his eyes, and the island's dark enchantment would take me back into the outskirts of the city. It was as if Crommelin didn't want me to reach him. As if he wanted me trapped here, to be devoured by ghost or demon, whichever got me first. Now that the pearl was on Lapser, it would find its way to him regardless of whether I lived or died. My blood heated. Well, I certainly had a preference. I leapt over a crumbled moon gate into an alleyway, ducking behind the half-crumbled wall to avoid detection. Hands shaking, I crossed my satchel over my body and took inventory. My mirror shard, the pearl, which had gone numb since bringing me to this accursed place, 2 dull knives I'd taken from Sundow. I stole a glance at the tower. Was it safe to make another run? It wasn't. The demons were winning the fight, and now they stalked the streets, stomping on broken skulls that still moved and clutching clumps of white hair in their jaws like trophies. A winged pair glided overhead. We have our orders, they announced to all below. Track the human. She can't be far. The demons nodded their assent in unison. I had to move. Now, I hoisted myself up a wall, using the broken bricks as footholds, then slid down onto the next road and ran. I might as well have been a fly caught in a web. The 2 winged demons had been trailing me, and they swooped down to corner me. One by one, demons plucked Kiki and my paper birds into the shadows, and before I could scream, I was surrounded. Silly princess, the demons spoke as one, a perverted chorus of every voice I had ever known and cherished. You don't want to go to the tower. The guardian is there, and he's no fun at all. always kills everyone so quickly. Come with us. We'll take you to the king. But first, a little sport." The two demons shuddered, and their eagle wings shrank away as their tiger-striped faces shifted into Hashos and Andahais. They were expecting me to be shaken and disturbed, but honestly, I'd become inured to such trickery. And besides, I'd fantasized plenty of times about punching Andahai in the gut. I slashed at Hasho first, cutting him across his chest. Inky smoke rippled from the wound. I knew it'd close up again soon, but I'd bought myself a few seconds. I slammed my knife into the back of Andahai's skull and drove the blade in. The flesh yielded easily under my knife, as if his head were a boiled turnip. Andahai snarled in pain. The demon snapped at my ankles, laughing as I jumped back. "We have a fighter," he growled. "Fighters have delicious souls. No wonder the king wants this one." I had better things to do than listen to demon gossip. I spun, brandishing my knives at the fiends that had captured Kiki and my paper birds. But as soon as I freed my friends, the false Hasho and Andahai grabbed me once more. They were done playing, and they hoisted me with them into the air, slipping back into their original forms as they flew. 2 arrows fired from below pierced their wings. The demons howled in pain and dropped me straight into the arms of a monster wearing Taken's face. His hand clapped over my mouth, smothering my cries. He pulled me into the shadows. I struggled, but no claws dug into my skin, no teeth bit into my flesh. His heart was racing, same as mine. I twisted to glance up at him. In the dim gray light of Lapser, his features were harder and harsher than I'd seen before. But then I took in the birch bough hung over his shoulder, the hair slick with seawater, the thin gash of blood smudging his cheek. My heart stopped. It was the real Takan, not some illusion. "You're alive." I breathed in astonishment. He inclined his head, making the smallest nod of acknowledgement. He led me down a narrow alleyway and into an abandoned house with crumbled gables. The demons had circled back and were marching toward our hiding place with reinforcements. "Where are you, Bloodsake?" they growled. "We have your brothers surrounded. Come out before we tear apart their flesh, feather by feather, and feast on their souls." I leaned back against Takan, sliding my arm under his and restraining every urge to jump out and search the sky for my brothers. I wasn't a fool. Once their taunts passed into the distance, I twisted to face Takan. I was brimming with questions. He put a finger to his lips. His face was gaunt. The amulet strain on him here was painfully strong. "The demons are under orders to bring you to Bander," he whispered. "He's told them that if he, not the Wraith, acquires the pearl, he will free them from Lapser." I stilled. So that was why the ghosts and demons were fighting. The ghosts were loyal to Crommelin, while the demons were mutinying against him. Demons are drawn to power, weak ones to strong ones, Ashley had said. Yet something didn't make sense. Why did Bander think the pearl would choose him over Crommelin? True, it hadn't exactly leapt into Crommelin's heart the moment I'd set foot on Lapser, but why? What was I missing? "I've been trying to find Crommelin," I said. "I started out of our hiding place, but Takan pulled me back. Bander will be expecting you. Let me go first." I shot him my fiercest look. You promised you wouldn't do anything heroic and stupid, Bashin Takan, yet you leapt into the middle of Lake Paduan like a fool. Don't think I've forgotten. Jumping off your brothers' backs wasn't heroic or stupid, he replied. It was a calculated move to get Bander away from you. You could have died, but I didn't. He touched his nose to mine tenderly. Nor did I leave you. My lips parted. I wanted to argue that he was weakened, that Bander would kill him. But trying to reason with him would only waste precious time, for I knew he would come with me no matter what I argued. So instead, I compromised. We'll go together. Lead the way. I grabbed his hand and ran. Our steps echoed behind us, and my breath grew heavy as we wove our way into the heart of Lapser, making for the tower. Around us, the buildings flickered, but I ignored the dark illusions they tried to present. At last, we approached the statue of the god of thieves, and Takan clutched Bander's amulet over his chest. I didn't see the Demon King, but he had to be near. The amulet was tugging us forward, as if by a string. It allowed us to pierce the invisible barrier that had blocked me before, and we ascended the stairs to its courtyard. There was Bander, surrounded by Lapser's demons. So it was true. He had won them over to his side. At the sight of me, he picked himself off a dead and crooked tree and swaggered to life. He was Smoke no longer, but a fully fleshed wolf with gray fur, blood-red eyes, and razor-sharp claws. There you are, Shiorionma, as expected, he said in greeting. Why so sullen? I told the demons you were clever, and I even spared you their usual tormenting. Do you not appreciate my thoughtfulness? Takan's hand went to Bander's amulet. Return, he shouted. Bander's body convulsed, smoke fraying from his arms and pointed ears, but he resisted. You bore it well, Bashin Takan, he said calmly, but alas, it has no power over me here in the heartland of darkness. To prove his point, Bander summoned the amulet back to his possession. He chuckled as Takan and I stepped back, both stricken. Let us pass, I demanded, hating how my voice shook. Crommelin must be reunited with his pearl. I heartily agree, Shirori. A promise is a promise, after all. Don't let me keep you from honoring it. Bander gallantly moved aside from the tower entrance. Go on ahead. These were the last words I expected from him. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap, but what choice did I have? Don't, Takan whispered. I forged on, and together Takan and I ascended the tower, scrambling up the hundreds of steps two at a time. When we finally reached the top, the pearl was humming louder than it ever had, and it beat like a drum against my hip. The wraith was still there, sitting on the edge of the roof. Darkness wreathed him, making it impossible for me to see more than the outline of his back as I approached. I opened the satchel one last time for the pearl and held it up. I have brought you home, I told it, as I promised. At the sight of the wraith, the pearl swiveled out of my hands and emitted a brilliant light, but it did not go to him. Instead, as fast as a comet, it shot out into the fathomless dark of the night. Crommelin finally turned then and raised a thick black talon. In one swipe, he wrapped it around my waist and leapt off the tower. Chapter 36. Up swooped the dragon, and the thief's tower disappeared beneath the clouds. Wind pelted my face, stinging my eyes so fiercely I could barely see. Crommelin! I shouted, thumping my fists at him. His beating wings overwhelmed my cries, and we flew higher, pivoting until his massive back was to the moon. There he hovered, allowing Emirinia's silvery glow to limn his dark form, from horn to talon, glinting off the jagged ridge of his spine. Smoke curled along the tips of his wings, which folded seamlessly into the starless night, and each of his onyx-black scales was edged like the tip of a spear. His eyes were mismatched as a lang's had been. One was deep red and merciless like a demon's. The other was blue as the sea, his dragon eye. In their centers glittered two broken pupils, each split in half like the pearl. Crommelin! I shouted again. This time, the dragon growled. The sound made his entire body tremble and set my ears ringing. Everything hurt, as if I were inside a drum that had just been struck. That name is not yours to speak, he snarled. Say it once more, and the dust of your bones will join the other imbeciles who dared trespass on my island. You would have killed me already if that were your plan, I said, finding courage by focusing on his mismatched eyes instead of his hulking figure. But I came here with your pearl. It must be calling for you, wherever it is. He did not reply. He didn't even acknowledge that he had heard me, though I knew he had. Crommelin! I cried. Take your pearl back. In a rush that made my stomach leap, he lifted me, dangling me before his broken eyes. Did you kill her? Her? Is he talking about my stepmother? No, no. I cried. I'm her. It matters not who you are. His fangs grazed his bottom lip as he glowered. You think because my darkness is lifted, I will take mercy upon you? Stupid, brazen girl. Never in all the ill-fated years of Lapser has anyone dared bring another demon here. My breath caught. Of all the preposterous things Crommelin thought Bander and I were allies, you misunderstand. There is nothing to misunderstand. You are not the first to come here since her death. So long as I am guardian of this island, it matters not how darkly I see. I spare no one. No, I shouted. I brought Bander here to make him the guardian and free you. So you gave him my true name, which has allowed him to lead my own demons against me. Helpful indeed. That was a mistake, I admitted. But if you reclaim your pearl, Crommelin's demon eye glowed noticeably brighter than the dragon one. The pearl won't take me like this. Like this? What did he mean by that? Shinari wanted me to give it to you, I whispered. She sent me. I'm her daughter. Crommelin flinched at the name. There was power in names. Shinari still meant something to him. The pearl, Crommelin, I cried out. You need to get it before Bander, as I said, he interrupted. So long as I am guardian of this island, I will spare no one. Shinari is dead. You will join her shortly. He dropped me into the sea. Chapter 37. It was a special kind of terror, knowing that within seconds, my bones would shatter into a million pieces and my entire life would be reduced to a bloody puddle. Even now, I couldn't tell my gut from my lungs from my heart. My body moved faster than my thoughts, and all I could feel was the screeching panic that every moment might be my last. Kiki. I wasn't ready to give up. Brothers. No response. My satchel slipped off my shoulder. I watched in horror as it disappeared into the mist. Needles of icy spray rained upon my skin as I plunged for the furious sea. It hurt like demon fire, but I couldn't scream. My lungs felt like rocks in my chest, dragging me down, and all the air inside me had gone out. Even if I could yell, what use would it do? No one could hear or see me in this darkness. I had nothing, except the magic in my blood. It was excruciating, trying to concentrate while I fell. I stretched my senses, reaching out for something, anything. Leaves caught in the fists of the wind, twigs from Lapser's shrunken trees, specks of stone. A slip of silk. My heart leapt. It was red silk from my birthday robes. I reached out to it, wrapping the strands of my magic, my soul, around it, pulling it closer, closer. In my delirious state, I could almost hear the cranes embroidered in the jacket bellowing and squawking. Against the roaring wind, cranes were bellowing and squawking. Real cranes, their wings batting Lake Paduan's spray as they pierced the mist. Could it be? Brothers. I choked. I saw Kiki first, sailing triumphantly at their helm. Moonlight clung to the silvery gold patterns on her wings, making them gleam. She let out a whoop, and 6 cranes dove under me, catching me with their long necks. In their beaks were the remains of my birthday jacket and gown, spread just wide enough to hold me. I rolled onto my old robes, clasping their folds. Kiki, I've never been so happy to see anyone. I told you to always call for me first, she said smugly. Can't have you dying. That'd be the end of me too. Something like a laugh climbed up my throat. Thank you, my dearest friend. It was like old times again, me clutching the edges of a tattered blanket, my brothers testing the fringes of life and death. But usually we were running away. Not so today. We have to go back. I yelled to my brothers, but I needn't have said anything. They were already on their way. Sea foam curled up against the coast of Lapser. From the air, the island looked like a ghostly hand, with 5 skeletal fingers extending off the mainland. Instead of bones and knuckles were escarpments and cliffs and veins of icy lake water that churned between the land masses. Winged demons loomed over the crags as we approached the tower. They'd been slavering with anticipation for us to return, and once we pierced the fog into the island, they barreled forth. The demons were fast. My brothers had no chance of outlying them or of fighting them, not while they bore my weight. And I was commanding the other cranes to fly higher and faster and me to lie low. But I couldn't stay. I had to face Bander. I whistled for Kiki and the 7 paper birds. Before I lost my nerve, I leapt. Kiki and the birds caught my feet with their wings. They rearranged themselves into a tenuous bridge, and I sprinted to the tower. I vaulted onto the roof, landing steps away from Takan. He was floating over a stone well. Dark blood streaked his face, a gold and silvery light shimmering around his silhouette. My stomach dropped. This was the moment I'd seen in the tears of a Murian. When Takan saw me, his fingers uncurled at his side and his lips parted. But he didn't speak. He had not the strength. Let him go, I choked, spying Bander lurking behind the well. Were I still human, I might be touched by this sentimental display, replied the demon. But alas, don't look so pained, Shirori. I haven't taken his soul yet. Not that the boy hasn't offered. He would give up his life for you. Unfortunately, it is not his life that interests me. It was mine. Will you come to me now in peace? Bander asked mockingly as he flexed his claws over Taken's throat. Or will you spring at me in vengeance when I rip him apart? Shirori, whispered Taken hoarsely. No! Give me your word that no demon will harm Taken, I said through gritted teeth. Or my brothers. Bander touched his amulet. This I can promise. The chains holding Taken vanished, and he dropped onto the flagstones. I didn't get a chance to go to him before the demons tossed his limp body to my brothers in the sky, and invisible shackles bound my wrists and dragged me to the well. Taken, I screamed. I was lifted high above the well and tipped forward so I could see the dark abyss swirling beneath, awaiting my fall. I couldn't twist, I couldn't turn, and when I tried to summon my magic, the chains around my neck tightened until I couldn't breathe. Bander stalked up from behind and pressed his cheek to mine. At his touch, I went hollow. His fur prickled like icy needles against my skin, numbing my every sense. I will say, he drawled, all that time in the mountains gave me many hours to think. His amulet swung from his neck, taunting me as I reached for it in vain. It was a puzzle figuring out how to deal with that pearl of yours, but my patience has been rewarded. I wasn't listening. I was silently calling for the pearl over and over. It had to help me against Bander, the way it had against Lady Salzea. But where was it? Are you paying attention, Shiorianma? Bander tugged on his amulet, and the chains around me tightened until I arched with pain. He snickered. I've been told you were not a diligent student of history. Yet you know what lies within this well, don't you? I had no choice but to look. The stones seemed to stretch forever, deeper even than the tower was tall. Jen had been so impassioned about the blood of stars, I'd expected something spectacular of its well. A dazzling display to eclipse the beauty of winter's first snowfall, to carry the colors of the universe. But it looked like soup. Thick soup, bubbling slightly with the color and density of black sesame paste. The blood of stars is the source of the greatest magic in Lorien, Bander was saying. The greatest that mortals can attain, anyway. He cracked a wide, feral smile. Within its well is the power of the gods, where oaths are made and bonds are broken. But we won't be needing its power today. I went cold all over again. What are you talking about? The pearl, Shirori. Your promise was fulfilled the moment the Wraith laid eyes on it. Your bond to the pearl is broken. It no longer protects you. Dread curdled in my throat. I couldn't speak. Don't believe me? He swept his hand across the sky, as if indicating the pearl's absence. Where is it now, when you need it most? Nowhere. The pearl was nowhere. That can't be, I whispered. Crommelin hasn't taken it. As I told you before, the guardian of Lapser has long succumbed to weakness and obsolescence. Even his own pearl doesn't recognize him. It doesn't want him. It is free to choose a new keeper. You're deluded if you think that'll be you. While you and the Wraith live, I do have some competition, Bander admitted. But once again, The solution is an exquisite gift of fate. He licked his lips. Your soul is strong and bountiful, Shiorianma. One of the finest I've ever smelled. It will sustain my army and give us the strength we need to slay a dragon. His voice rose as my heart sank. And once you and Crommelin are dead, the pearl will be mine, along with the demons of Lapser. We will be free. Revelation punched me in the gut. You wanted to come to Lapser. You planned this? Guilty, Vander purred. I even left you my amulet at the front of the breach so you'd be sure to find it. You really ought to thank me. He sneered. My only regret is leaving your Kia and demons to languish in the mountains. They were such hospitable hosts. It pained me to lie to them. But they were so desperate, so willing to believe anything I told them. Like you. A shot of anger seized my muscles, and I struggled against my chains, trying to strike the demon. One little vision in the waters, and you were almost ready to give the pearl in exchange for the sentinel's life. I never understood what you saw in him, Shirori. But since you seem to value his life so highly, he jerked his chin at the demons standing guard behind him. Find the sentinel and kill him. The cranes too. No, I cried. You made an oath, you. Vander leaned close. A word of advice, he said darkly. Next time you make a bargain with a demon, be sure to seal it with your soul. Hatred boiled out of me, and I convulsed, twisting with all my might. But I couldn't even touch Vander, so I spat. Vander didn't flinch as my spittle dribbled down his cheek. No need to rile yourself, Shirori. I kept my promise to you. You will still bleed. He seized my hand while I struggled and slowly, reverently, turned it palm up. After all, he said as his nail skated deep across the veins in my arm, nothing agitates the soul like pain. Blood pooled bright against my skin. It ran in a thin river at first, staining the yellow trim of my sleeves, before branching off into little streams that trickled down my arm. My knees buckled as it rushed out of me, and the world swayed. Focus. I crushed my jaws together. Focus, Shirori. Always so good at keeping silent, said Vander. Don't be afraid to cry. There is no shame in agony. I wouldn't give him the pleasure. My body hurt like demon fire, but I was used to holding in my voice. Used to holding in the pain too. Crommelin. I shouted in my mind. Where are you? Vander dragged his nails against the stone wistfully. It's rather poetic, don't you think? I came here once to consume the blood of stars. My passage here marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. So it shall be for you. Chapter 38. My blood started to spill faster. It fell in swirls of crimson, spinning off like raindrops to the bottom of the well. Then Vander hooked a claw into my heart, as Lady Salzea had done once, and plucked out a strand of my soul. As it stole out of me, like a thread unspooling, my body began to shimmer silver and gold. One strand multiplied into dozens, spiraling down and down until I could see the darkness beneath begin to churn. Vander beckoned the demons closer, waving the strands of silvery gold in their direction. Drink. Take her strength and wield it against your former guardian. Once he is dead, I will free you all, and we shall take the world for our own. Let this be your last hour on this accursed island. Their growls went silent, and that was the most chilling sound of all. My eyes rolled back, and I held on to whatever reserves of strength I had left. I wouldn't give up without a fight. Her soul is too tough, the demons complained. It won't cut. Then bite harder. The chain of Bander's amulet rattled over the well, but I was too weak to even reach out for it. All I could do was whisper, Crommelin. Crommelin. I could feel the power of Crommelin's name as I spoke it, over and over until the wind carried it across Lapser, until the sound sank deep beneath the stones of the tower, until the word edged along the dark that rippled inside the well of the blood of stars. Bander had wielded the name as a weapon against Crommelin to win over Lapser's demons. I would use it to summon him back. Crommelin. Crommelin. Bander's ruff bristled, and the amulet sank into his fur, no longer humming. Something had caught his attention. It was the pearl. It had returned, a crack of light slipping out of its broken center. The sight made me dizzy. The color in my world had washed out, and I could barely keep my eyes open. Go to Crommelin, I beseeched it weakly. Reunite with him. The pearl didn't respond. It skulked in my shadow, a numb observer. So you've come at last, Bander said, turning to the pearl. He clasped it. And you will choose me. No, growled the guardian of Lapser. It won't. The pearl flew out into oblivion again, the way it had when Crommelin crashed onto the tower. His wings alone spanned the expanse of the entire rooftop, and he dwarfed Bander easily. Bow down, Crommelin ordered the demons, but they no longer obeyed. They were Bander's to command now, and Bander had commanded them to kill. They shot up to attack, biting and gnashing at their former master. Crommelin knocked them away with his wings, but still they did not bow. More demons came, in relentless waves, and as formidable as Crommelin was, I sensed with dread that Bander was winning. Blood the color of tarnished gold smeared the folds of Crommelin's wings, deep, diagonal cuts and scratches that the demons had given him. In this condition, he couldn't hold them off forever. The ghosts rose to Crommelin's aid, and in a soundless clash, a great battle was fought. Humans and cranes and paper birds had no place in this fight, would only die in this fight. But I couldn't do anything to help them. Get out of here. I cried when I saw my brothers dip through the mist. They had returned and bit at the invisible chains that held me. You fools, I whispered through the relief in my heart that they were alive. Leave before the demons kill you. Go. Of course they ignored me. So did Takan. My vision was too faint to make out his face, but I recognized the soft tap of his footsteps, the warmth of his hand on mine. I've one arrow left, he told me. Your brothers, and I think if I shoot Bander's amulet, we can free you. Do it, I whispered. I'm ready. Takan was swift. I couldn't imagine how he would pick out one demon amid the horde, but I heard the snap of a bowstring and the whir of his arrow flying. Then, a beat later, I dropped. His arrow had found its mark. My brothers caught me as my fingers scraped against the lip of the well. Takan reached for my arms, and Kiki grabbed my hair, the 7 paper birds nipping my sleeves and collar. 6 princes, 8 birds, and 1 lordling, all here to catch you from falling into a well, said Kiki, shaking her head at me. Not your finest day, Shirori. She landed on my shoulder, the glint of gold and silver on her wings shining brighter than ever. But we've been through worse. So we have, I replied as I took Taken's hand and slowly pulled myself up. Spinning out of a hidden corner, the pearl crept toward me. I crossed my arms. You're no more than a child, aren't you? I scolded it. I brought you halfway across the world, nearly getting killed a dozen times, and you're too afraid to go back to him? The pearl pulsed rather ruefully, it seemed. It didn't come out of the shadows. Irritation radiating from my core, I limped toward it and scooped it under my arm. Your home is his heart, and his heart is your home. You don't belong to anyone or anywhere else. Whatever has happened between you, you two must sort out. Help him now, or Crommelin will die. A wink of the pearl's light bathed me, which I took as assent. Come, I said to it firmly. We know what we have to do. There was little time. Powerful as Crommelin was, he couldn't defeat Lapser's demons on his own. Already, Vander was starting to howl his triumph. I clasped the pearl in both hands. Its halves began to open, sparks of light dancing out like fireflies, but I didn't flinch. I wouldn't even blink. Free Crommelin of this island, I commanded the pearl. He is the dragon you belong to, and you are the heart he seeks. The island and all its demons and ghosts will be Vander's. Make it so. In a searing burst, the pearl's power exploded over Lapser. The pearl floated above my hands, spinning faster than ever, the great fracture in its center crackling like lightning. That's enough, Kiki exclaimed. The pearl, it's killing you. I barely heard her. Light and wind and heat gushed from the spinning pearl, and my back arched as it tugged at the glimmering silver-gold threads of my soul. Brighter and brighter the pearl shone. My pupils burned just from looking at it, but I couldn't turn away. By now, its light encompassed the entire island, casting a net over every demon and ghost, even Vander. I could feel it was on the verge of breaking, its center splintering a hair further with each moment to emit more light, more power. Stop, I told the pearl. That's enough. Of course it didn't listen. I reached up to hold it, to stop it from cleaving in two. It was like holding an exploding star. Heat scalded my cheeks, and my hair came undone, flying wildly. Before my eyes, every strand turned silvery white, until I couldn't tell my hair from the light. Just before it became too much to bear, the pearl whizzed out of my grasp to Crommelin's side. A firework of light rocked the sky, and the demons snapping at Crommelin's wings and stabbing at his flesh flew apart. Crommelin emerged from the frenzy, his claw curled around the pearl, and he let out a deafening roar. The island's ghosts rose once more. They picked up their fallen skulls and hacked bones and thronged into one teeming mass that tore into the demons. Crommelin too found his strength. Launching from the sky, he dove and landed on Vander's back, pinning him to the ground. You wish to become the king of demons, Crommelin boomed. Welcome to your domain. From now on, your power extends not past these waters. My reign is done, and now yours begins. I bind you to the forgotten isles of Lapser. Vander began to writhe, his fur blurring into smoke as the magic of the island seized him. No, he cried. No! The demons of Lapser squealed as the feast began, and the ghosts stretched open their gaping maws and consumed each of them whole. Championed by the power of Cromelin's pearl, the ghosts wielded their cursed touch, and every demon on the island transformed into a ghost. It was a fitting punishment for betraying their former guardian, and ironic for Bander, for now he would be the lone demon of the Forgotten Isles. With magnificent strength, Cromelin grabbed Bander by the tail and flung him into the well, sealing it shut with a flare of demon fire. The tower made a great and terrible shudder as Lapser claimed its new guardian. Takan and I had fled to the tower ramparts, but now the stairs were blocked by demon fire. There was no way out. We have to jump, I shouted. My brothers hovered below, assailed by ferocious winds. You'll never make it home without the basket, wailed Kiki. I gritted my teeth. She was right, but getting off this island was my primary concern. I'd worry about Kiata later. Hand in hand, Takan and I dove off the tower. As we plummeted toward the sea, my brothers swerved to catch us, but the winds were too strong and buffeted them off course. Out of the darkness, Cromelin swooped into view. Takan and I tumbled onto his wing, rolling from the impact until we hit against the spikes along his spine. Hold on, I yelled to Takan, grabbing a spike and clinging on with all my might. Faster than the sons of the wind, Cromelin surged past Lapser, piercing the mist that shrouded the Forgotten Isles. I held my breath, waiting until I caught sight of 6 crimson crowns in our wake. Had every muscle in my body not been utterly spent, I would have let out a jubilant whoop. But I settled for a ripple of satisfaction in my heart. We'd won. Bander was now trapped on Lapser forever, I hoped. I watched as the island receded behind us, blanketed by sea and mist until it became as small as a grain, a speck. Then nothing. You should rest, Takan said as we settled into the crook of Cromelin's wing. He ripped his sleeve to begin wrapping my arm. You need to heal. I parted my lips to protest, but Takan cut me off. I might not be able to cast sleeping enchantments, but I have a spell of my own. I was mystified until he smiled and began to sing, "Let the sleep spirits come to dance in your dreams. May you dance with them and awaken to a brighter world." It was an old lullaby every child in Kiata knew, one I hadn't heard in years. Takan's voice was magic, and it was what I needed. For once I was obedient. I laid my head on his lap and let him cast his spell. Chapter 39. Dawn opened over the Tsuyen's pale waters. Cromelin had hardly said a word during the entire flight, but I recognized my homeland's shores long before I saw the fishing skiffs and shrimping boats dotting the sea and before the scent of summer pine sharpened in my nostrils. It was the sun upon my brother's feathers, its light tender and familiar, the same as it had been 100 other mornings when they were cursed. Its warmth seeping under their wings and lingering on their crimson crowns was what told me we had returned to Kiata. I was half awake when Cromelin flung Takan and me carelessly onto land. It was a rude awakening, and I nearly rolled off the cliff into the sea. Takan grabbed me by the arm, pulling me safely away from the brink. As my hair whipped about me in whirls of silvery white, I flew into his arms, laughing and unable to stop. He was trying hard to look stern, to smother the clumsy smile that threatened his seriousness, and failing adorably. I didn't care that my brothers, who had landed on the same cliff, were barely a stone's throw away. I didn't care that Kiki was soaring above us, yelling orders at her new little legion of paper subordinates to poke the passing pigeons. All I cared about was Takan. I grabbed him by the collar and kissed him. Our lips were cracked from the wind and the cold, our hair mussed and windswept and badly in need of washing, and I was sure my breath was anything but sweet. And yet, as he pressed me against him, deepening our kiss with the same rawness and passion, I wished for every day to begin just like this. Someone must be feeling better, remarked Tatkin when we finally surfaced for air. What was that for? Not that I'm complaining. For being you, I replied, planting more kisses on his nose, his cheeks, his teeth by accident. We laughed together. For being mine. Tatkin sat up and leaned on his elbow. With one strong arm, he pulled me close. I was always yours. You just took a long time to see it. So I did, I murmured. A beat from kissing him again. Are you finished? Crommelin interrupted. Like children caught making mischief, Tatkan and I quickly snapped to attention. I sprang to my feet just as Crommelin landed. Sunlight dappled his back, gilding his scales. He tipped his head to face the sun directly, taking in its warmth as if he hadn't felt it in years. And I realized he probably hadn't. The pearl lurked in his shadow. Like his eyes, it was still broken. I started to ask him about it, but before I had the chance, he tossed a piece of glass at my feet. This is yours, he said gruffly. It was the mirror of truth. Don't get in the habit of scattering your belongings in Lake Paduan. You won't get them back. Thank you, I said as I dusted the shard and wiped it on my sleeve. Crommelin was moving toward the edge of the cliff, his wings already spreading when I ran after him. Wait, he growled, and only narrowly did I avoid being hit by his wing. I staggered, wisely leaving some distance between us. My brothers, I began. The pearl turned them into cranes so I could reach Lapser. Please, change them back. Crommelin barely glanced at the 6 cranes waddling in the sand. What you did with the pearl is none of my concern. But you humans are all the same. I do you one favor and you ask for another. My jaw locked. It isn't a favor. They risked their lives to help save you. Their lives will be better spent as cranes than as men. Fury boiled in my throat, but I swallowed it, knowing it'd do no good to lash out at Crommelin. He'd only fly away, and my brothers would be trapped forever as cranes. So I chose my next words carefully. Humans treated you like a monster, and you hate them, I said. I understand that. They were the same to Shinari. Crommelin didn't flinch this time when I spoke my stepmother's name. Undeterred, I ventured a step toward him. You were friends. A long time ago. Your stepmother made the mistake of thinking so, he replied. It cost her. So I've heard, I said, remembering Eugel's words. I'm sure she hated you. But you must have deserved it. At that, Crommelin fell silent. Sensing an opening, I said, quietly, Why did you kill Vanna? Crommelin gave me a dark look. Shinari and I had an understanding, he replied, speaking through locked teeth. I promised her I would not harm the golden one and that I would not claim the pearl in her heart until she died. I am immortal, after all. A few decades of waiting is inconsequential. What happened? Obviously, I didn't wait. Crommelin stared straight into the sun. I was tricked into attacking Vanna. Shinari failed to protect her sister from me. She had a chance to kill me, but she hesitated. Another one of her mistakes. My eyes fell on a stab wound in his chest. Unlike the wounds he'd incurred while fighting Vander's demons on Lapser, this one had not healed. It was deep and old, pale against his night-black flesh and gravely close to his heart. So that was how Raikama's spear had broken. It still hurts from time to time, said Crommelin thickly. As you say, I deserved it. I was quiet, filled with pity and remorse for all the wrongs of the past, and a sad wonder that they had all led to this moment. But a few things still didn't make sense. If Vanna died, shouldn't the pearl have gone to you? I broke my promise to Shinari, said Crommelin. When an immortal breaks his promise, he loses a piece of his soul. The pearl found me unworthy. I eyed the pearl as it lurked in the half-dragon's shadow. It chose Shinari. It burrowed itself inside her, forcing me to wait until she died. A pause. She cursed me. Until I die, you will live in darkness. You felt it when she passed, I said. It was like waking up from a dream, Crommelin said. The demons sense my change too. That is why they were eager to follow Vander. I nodded, understanding. What happened after my stepmother cursed you? She disappeared to Kyoto, and the Dragon King trapped me into being the guardian of Lapser. Crommelin bared his teeth. For that, I will never forgive him. You'll seek your revenge. I will go wherever I wish, he said. That is what it means to be free, after all. For 16 years, I have been the guardian of Lapser. Vander will be there for much longer. I hope he'll be trapped in that well forever, I said. He'll find a way out. Even demons deserve to be free. Most of them, anyway. A grunt. Demon magic created Lorien, same as the gods and dragons, and they are owed respect. Something your ancestors clearly forgot. I met his glare with a frown. My ancestors trapped the demons to keep Kyoto safe. And for their lifetimes it worked. He growled. Humans are selfish and short-sighted. But consider this. When the demons finally break free, they will be wrathful. They will inflict 1,000 years' worth of vengeance upon your land. Ask yourself then whether your ancestors made the right choice. His rancor took me aback, and I drew an uneasy breath. You sympathize with them? Of course I do. I am half demon, he said. My kind is not without feeling, and I can feel my brothers in Kyoto. They are in anguish, in pain. So much for hoping Crommelin might use the pearl to seal the holy mountains once more. I took a step back, wary of his wings and how easy it would be for him to knock me off the cliff into the sea. I'm sorry for all that my ancestors have done, I said, meaning it. But if what you say is true, I cannot let them be free. Then why should I free your brothers when you will not free mine? It was a good question, and I swallowed. I don't know if I can answer that, I replied honestly. Except that you know what it's like to be cursed, to be trapped between worlds. I know what it's like to be alone, Crommelin said. Your brothers will have each other. You had Shinari, I said softly. Her last wish was for me to return your pearl. She didn't hate you in the end." The words undid his wrath, and for the first time, he folded his wings to his sides, allowing the sun to drench him completely. Gathering my courage, I nudged the pearl toward him. "Please," I said softly. He stared at his reflection in the pearl's dark surface. Even in the sun, its fractured light spangled his pupils, as if they'd reaped a net full of stars. Then his shoulders heaved, and he let out a fearsome growl. "You asked for my help, princess. Pray you don't regret it." With no more warning than that, he threw Takan and me over his wing once more and blasted up into the clouds. Chapter 40. I more than regretted asking Crommelin for help. As he swerved away from the ocean and wheeled over the heart of Kyoto, my stomach made a hard swoop of fear. "Stop," I shouted, desperate to get Crommelin's attention. "Stop. People will see you." I didn't know whether he heard me, but it couldn't have been a coincidence that he immediately did the opposite, dipping lower and picking up speed. Now, as we tore past village after village, I could hear the screams. No one had spied a demon in 1,000 years, and I could only imagine the terror and panic this hulking nightmare with wings wide enough to block the sun would instill. "This wasn't what I meant by helping," I said to Crommelin. "Enough. Enough. This is what you get for trusting a demon," Kiki screeched from behind. "Hurry and jump on your brothers' backs before the lunatic drops you from the sky." Even if I had wanted to, I couldn't. My brothers couldn't match his speed, and no one could predict where he would go next. He swerved and swooped every other second, as if encouraged by the shrieks that followed. Please let this be a nightmare, I thought. Maybe the demons got me on Lapser and I'm still asleep. On second thought, I wasn't sure I'd prefer that. What I was sure of was that half of all Kyoto had seen Crommelin by the time he came upon the holy mountains. There, he finally slowed. As he hovered, ignoring the legion of armed and alarmed soldiers by the breach, I could feel the wind change. Rubble spilled down the mountainside, and the forest trees juddered. I couldn't tell whether the demons inside were reacting to me or to Crommelin. "Do you hear them?" Crommelin asked me, breaking his silence. "Do you hear them?" "Shirori," the demons whispered. "Release us." "Yes, I hear them," I shouted. "Now, will you stop?" Father's soldiers spared Crommelin from answering. Spears shot up at his wings, one or two bouncing against his knuckles and nearly impaling Takan and me. Praise the great gods for Crommelin's thick skin. He spiraled away until the weapons could barely touch him. Arrows came next, barraging the clouds, arcing and falling like dying stars. Crommelin sped across the forest and over the palace. Home washed by, a blur of blue-tiled roofs, vermilion gates, and lush gardens speckled with pink-blossomed trees. I didn't want to think about how I was going to explain Crommelin's joyride to Father. Our aerial tour of Kyoto was over, and Crommelin had the gall to land in the middle of Jindara's commercial square, right in front of the capital's temple. The crowds parted in waves, screaming in terror as they ran. Carts toppled, mules and horses crashed into street lamps, and boats in the canals rammed into one another, crates of precious cargo tumbling into the water. The earth shook under Crommelin's feet, and lanterns and rusted green tiles fell from the temple's eaves. He deposited Takan and me on a spice merchant's tent. "You asked for my help?" he said amid the screams. "This is it." "You are welcome." "How's this help?" was all I could manage. My gut had gone up to my throat, and I could hardly hold in my nausea from Cromelin's erratic flying. He turned his back to me. "I've lived in a nightmare for 16 years, and your country's been in a dream for 1,000. Everyone needs to wake up." Those were the last words he spoke to me before he vaulted back into the sky. Stones and oranges and melons pelted after the demon, and I knew that once he was out of sight, they'd be aimed at me. Takan and I had started to climb down from the tent when something rose behind the striped purple canopy. The pearl. Perhaps it was a trick of the sun, but I swore that it slanted its crack to face me, and its light winked. You're welcome, of sorts, for all the trouble it had wrought upon my life." Then it blasted after Cromelin, who was hovering just below the clouds, and enveloped the half-demon in a flash of light. At last, he began to transform. His scales suddenly shone, turning from black as onyx to blue-green like a forest of sapphire and jade. The spikes on his wings were sanded away, and when his wings parted, I saw that his eyes too had changed. They were mismatched, one a crisp blue, like the sky above us, and the other still red, though no longer the demon blood red it had once been. The color was warmer, deeper, an eye befitting a dragon. The arrows came to a halt, the flying stones and oranges too. Fear slowly turned into awe, and adults and children alike crawled out of their hiding places to watch the sight unfolding. "A dragon," they murmured. "A dragon!" A few people began bowing, and priestesses and monks from the temple prayed aloud. Drums pounded and bells chimed, and some of the elderly were even crying. "The gods have returned. Quick, make a wish. Wish on the luck of the dragons." By the strands, a demon transforming into a dragon? It's a sign from the heavens. I flattened my palms against the tent to lean forward. My attention turned from Cromelin to the people. I was astonished by how rapidly their reactions had changed toward him. I guess Saria was right about how much people love dragons, I remarked to Kiki as she perched lightly on my head. A bittersweet tightness returned to my chest. "Can you imagine how smug he'd be if you were here?" "He'd be insufferable. He'd be collecting coins," said Kiki. She pointed a wing at someone on the street. "Look, one person already is. I bet they'll be selling dragon masks everywhere by the end of the day." That made me chuckle. "Sure, Ori," Takken whispered, nudging my attention toward the temple pavilion where my brothers had landed. Look. They were changing too, their enchantment finally undone. For the last time, their feathers smoothed into flesh, and their wings melted into human arms and legs. The crimson crowns on their heads blackened into mops of hair that badly needed to be washed. "And hi!" I cried, jumping down and running. Benbin, Reiji, Wande, Jotun. Hasho. Before my brothers could even rise to their feet, I threw my arms around Wande and Benkai, the closest to me, and hugged them tight. "Our bones are still stretching, sister," Wande said with a cringe. "We could use a moment." I let him go, but only to hug Jotun and Reiji. Hasho kept his arm behind his back, but he smiled so widely I did not ask what was wrong. In the distance, Crommelin gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. His wings were gone, but he could fly, his body kept afloat by the pearl, whole at last, shimmering in his chest. He launched into the sky, threading into the clouds and disappearing among the birds, the same as he'd done in Shinari's memory. Dragon and Pearl had been reunited, my promise to Rikama kept. As I turned to join the others, a silvery ray of light danced over my arm, illuminating a bracelet of red threads on my wrist. Two shone brighter than the rest, the one connecting me to Takan and the other to an unseen end high above the clouds. "Stepmother," I whispered. One of her paper birds perched on my palm, head tilted inquisitively. It didn't speak, yet I knew what it was asking. There came a pang in my heart. "I'm ready," I said. With a nod, the bird snipped Rikama's thread from my wrist, and the wind swept it away. I wanted to chase it, but I held my hand back. I watched as, with one last shimmer, the thread vanished above me, never to be seen again. I hugged my arms to my chest. I was on my own now. Rikama's paper birds landed on my brother's shoulders and Takan's, and together they opened their wings to me. "You are without her," the gesture seemed to say, "but you won't be alone." With that, the wind blew them away, and the 7 paper birds drifted after the threads they had cut. I knew they weren't coming back. The pang in my heart faded as I slid between Hasho and Takan. I took Takan's hand, but as I reached for Hasho's, he flinched. He was fidgeting with the folds of his cloak and tucked his arm under it quickly. "Did an arrow graze you?" I asked worriedly. No. I'm just not used to wearing clothes. Takes me a minute to forget my feathers. Always a bad liar, Hasho. Is your arm? I'm fine." Hasho took my hand, squeezing it tight as if to prove himself. I wasn't convinced, but the distant clap of firecrackers distracted me. Around us, children sang and danced down the streets, waving colorful fans. Merchants and vendors returned to their stalls, and another round of firecrackers exploded. A few kites glided over the parks. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought it was a festival day. People were already cleaning up the mess Crommelin had made, and for every mistrustful glare that was sent my way, there came a dozen beaming smiles. I told myself to focus on the smiles and not worry too much about the frowns, at least until we got home to Father. My shoulders relaxed, and I forgot what I had been going to say to Hasho. I swung him and Takan toward the rest of my brothers, tangling my arms around theirs until we made a knot. "It's been a long journey," I murmured, hugging my family close. Cheekily, I looked up at the 7 young men. "Is there time to get lunch before we go home?" Visiting Jindara was always a treat, and I grew giddy as we made our way through the city streets. It was even rowdier than usual, thanks to the scene Crommelin had made. But within an hour, the crescent-shaped fishing boats were drifting down the canals again, and most of the merchants had cleaned up their stalls and shops. Carts loaded with rugs and earthenware from the spice road trundled along. Silk lanterns hung at every street corner, and children raced into alleys to feast on their favorite snacks. I could already smell Chureo Street. Devoted entirely to food, It was one of my favorite places in all of Kyoto. Coincidentally, it was also on the way to the palace, so we couldn't avoid it completely. I considered that a blessing from the gods. Jotun bought a straw hat to cover my white hair. It was far too large and I felt silly, but it would be wise to try and stay incognito. Though we were blocks away from where we had started, almost every person was still talking about the dragon in the sky. Word about me would spread. And quickly. "We have to hurry," said Andhai cautiously. He and Benkai were observing the glances that came our way. "Don't be picky about lunch, Shirori. Anything will do. Everyone's so happy." "What is there to worry about?" said Jotun. "Maybe Kyoto is ready for magic again." "They think they witnessed a miracle," replied Reiji, ever pessimistic. "That doesn't mean they're ready for flying paper birds and princes who turn into cranes." "Or maybe they are," Wande said, agreeing with his twin for once. Reiji was still skeptical. "We'll see what the council thinks about what happened." I kept quiet. I didn't want to worry anyone, but with every few steps a rush of dizziness went to my head. Food would help. "Are you all right?" Takan asked. While everyone else had been observing the reactions to the dragon, he had been observing me. I fidgeted with my hat. "Just hungry. And tired." Takan's brows knit, and he let go of my hand. "I'll be right back." I frowned after him. It wasn't like him to leave without explanation, but I didn't puzzle over his disappearance for long. Food was a glorious distraction, and my brothers and I were passing a rice cake cart. My favorite rice cake cart, to be precise. I had patronized it often in my old life. The chef and I were on friendly terms. Keeping my head low, I went up to her. "I'd like 2 dozen of the half-moon cakes with peach filling, a dozen regular with lotus paste, another dozen with red bean." I paused, remembering that I was traveling with 7 boys who hadn't eaten in over a day. "Make that 3 dozen with red bean. And the peanut ones too." In spite of my hat, my enormous order gave me away. "Princess Shirori, is that you?" Mrs. Hannah exclaimed. It is. Welcome back. So much for staying incognito." Within minutes, cooks from other vendors were hounding me. Someone pushed a tray into my arms, and soon it was piled high with skewers of sizzling meat, eggplant stuffed with bean curd and shrimp, noodle soups with floating fish balls, and dumplings that wriggled and danced as I walked. "I didn't realize how beloved you were by Jindara's food district," Takan remarked as he returned to my side. He smiled wryly. "I'm starting to think I should have given you cakes instead of a comb." "No." I set down my food, looking thoughtful. "Cakes I relish only for a minute. Your comb I'll treasure forever." I wiped sugar off my fingers and winked at him. "But I will take cakes over flowers any day." He laughed. "Noted. Now try this." I stuffed a skewer of cumin-spiced lamb into Takan's mouth. "I bet you don't have this in Iro." I offered him a spicy dumpling that dripped with chili oil, and then, before he had a chance to finish it, I planted the plumpest rice cake, oozing with red bean paste, on his palm. "Don't I get some?" Kiki asked. "Or am I to stick with paper worms?" I laughed at her. It was like I'd gone back in time to last year's summer festival. I was the carefree Princess Shirori again, famed for her discerning food taste and ability to conquer every dish at the festival. Soon it wasn't just the food vendors swarming me. City dwellers did too. The joyful ones blessed me and cried, "The luck of the dragons is with you, Princess Shirori." The curious ones asked, "Can you tell us what happened with the dragon? Why was he a demon before?" And behind the crowds, fearful stragglers murmured, "So it's true, the princess does have magic. Look at her hair, like a ghost. What can it mean if a dragon is here? The demons must be growing stronger. I'll bet it's her fault." That's what my friend in Yaman said, that the spell that made us sleep all winter, the fires that have been raging across the forest, it's all because of Shioriama. I swallowed the last fishball on my skewer and staked it into an uneaten rice cake. My appetite was gone, and I tugged my hat firmly over my head and hustled my way through the crowds, hating that Andahai had been right after all. We needed to go home. Benkai had been whispering to the sentinels patrolling the city, and on his signal, they dispersed the crowds. Trained soldiers that they were, Takan and my brothers surrounded me and shuttled me to the edge of the city. I kicked a loose stone on the road as we waited for a carriage to take us home. Who would have thought I'd miss the bowl on my head so much? "I think your appetite gave you away more than your face," Reiji teased. 7 dozen rice cakes? "I was ordering for all of us," I replied. But I should have been more careful. "I'm tired." I wasn't thinking. Suddenly exhausted, I sank onto a bench beside the public garden. "Sorry, everyone." Jotun smacked his lips. "Don't apologize. After a week of mice and worms, I'm still coming out of my bird brain too. Besides, you needed food. You were looking like a ghost. And not only because of your hair." I combed my fingers self-consciously through the silvery knots in my hair, and Takan sat next to me. "Ignore him," he whispered. "Ignore all of them." He could always read me. I made the barest nod. "I'll try." A hemp pouch dangled from his wrist, reminding me to ask where he'd gone earlier. "You went shopping?" I asked. "I wondered why you mysteriously vanished." "I bought bandages and ointment for your arm," he replied. "I know the palace will have better medicine, but we're still an hour from the gates at least. And you lost a lot of blood." He started to open the pot. "This will help." I wrinkled my nose. "Smells awful." "That's why I waited until you'd finished eating." I glowered, but much as I hated to admit it, the ointment really did help my arm feel better. When he was finished, I dipped my fingers into the medicine and smeared it over the cuts on his face. I cupped his cheek and said softly, "I'm not the only one who got hurt, so I'm not the only one who should smell like dung." Takan shook with laughter, and he kissed my fingertips, dung smell and all. He was about to say something more when Andhai ruined our interlude. "Not in front of family," my oldest brother said crisply, and I swore Takan's back went straight as a spear. I crossed my arms. "Oh, come now. You'd be the same if Chinya were here." "It's time to go," said Andhai, ignoring me. "The carriage is nearly here. You need to rest, Shirori. We all need to rest." Why did he flick his eyes at Hasho when he said it? What did I miss? I glanced back at my youngest brother. He'd been quiet this whole time, keeping to himself and eating sparingly. A stray cat had trotted up to his side, and a sparrow perched on his shoulders, nibbling on leftover crumbs. He'd always been my most sensitive brother, and I assumed he needed extra time to recover from his transformation. Is Hasho he's fine? Andahai's curt response triggered my suspicion, and before my brothers could stop me, I pushed my way to Hasho's side. It's too hot to be wearing a cloak, I said, tugging on the heavy fabric draped over his shoulder. He flinched, and finally I understood why he had retreated from our company. His right arm, the very one that Bander had cursed, was still a wing, and black like a pocket of night. Hasho, I exclaimed in shock. Hasho lifted the wing, letting its ends peek out of the cloak. Its feathers were long and tapered, in a cruel imitation of fingers. A bird's arm, not a man's. Never could it grasp a cup of tea or write or draw or even fit into a sleeve. It's one arm, Hasho said, folding the wing to his side. It could have been worse. He managed a half grin. I only need one hand to beat Reiji at chess. Oh, Hasho, I whispered, a sob racking my chest. Why didn't you say something? Maybe Kiki can track Crommelin down. Maybe it's not too late and nothing can be done, my youngest brother interrupted. I've known it for some time. I've accepted it. But Hasho stroked my cheek with his feathers. This is hardly the worst of outcomes. I can still speak to the birds and Kiki. His tone was gentle, but firm. Don't argue, it pleaded. My brother retracted his wing. At least people will believe us when we tell them we spent our days as cranes. People are already starting to believe, I said through the ache in my throat. And thanks to Crommelin, we'll have to confront that sooner rather than later. I'd hoped Crommelin might help me solve Kiata's demon problem, but he'd only aggravated them beyond measure. I couldn't ignore the demons forever. Is it our right to keep them imprisoned? I murmured, almost to myself. Magic and the demons. Maybe that was our ancestors' mistake in the first place. You can't free the demons, said Reiji. That'd be madness. It would. And yet, I couldn't bear the thought of Kiata suffocating for another 1,000 years without magic. Maybe I was being selfish for thinking of how Hasho's wing would brand him the rest of his life, of how a touch of Raikama's curse would always haunt my brothers, of how I would never be able to traipse down Chireo Street, or anywhere, without hearing whispers that I was a witch or a monster. Of how I so desperately wanted home to be home again. Maybe I was being foolish for thinking I played any role in Kiata's fate at all. Yet if I did nothing, who would? Was it worse to be a kite with no anchor, wandering lost on the wind, or a kite that didn't dare seize the wind and never flew? One at least had a chance of finding home, however slim. The other had none. As I stepped into the carriage, I knew which kite I had to choose.